Quick disclaimer before we begin the video. This video is going to be about when Orientalism turns into a racist, dehumanizing view of Middle Eastern people. As a Middle Easterner who has grown up for a good chunk of my life in the West, myself, I will have many personal experiences to draw from in order to illustrate some of those broader anthropological points. So just so that you know, this video essay will be unusually more personal than the other ones. And I will be talking about some of my own rather heavy experiences with racism in the second part of the video. So just so you know what to expect, the first part of this video is going to be very run-of-the-mill, typical like the other video essays. The second one will be more of a sort of a biography of shitty things that I went through. So just so you know what to expect. Anyway, let's start the video.
Hello everybody, welcome to the beautiful land of Orientalism. My name is Mohammed. I am the great Lebanese duduk player of the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Let us now pray to the Hindu god Shiva. Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Today we are going to take a magical journey on my magical plane that is headed for the Twin Towers. I'm Middle Eastern, okay? This is Orientalism. I have to bomb people. It's as simple as this, okay? It ain't fucking complicated. What am I doing in Italian American? It's not even Orientalism at this point. It's just like Earthism. Yeah, so I thought I'd make a follow-up on the first video because there's kind of like two definitions to Orientalism. And the one that I tackled in the original video was the one that is the earlier definition, if you will. Originally, Orientalism initially only meant the artistic depictions of the Middle East as seen through the lens, often uninformed and not very accurate lens, of Western artists. In 1978, however, Edward Said, who's a Palestinian-American writer, he published the foundational work, Orientalism, in which he pretty much expanded the scope of the term to include views of the Middle East by the West that are rooted in imperialistic, colonialistic, chauvinistic, racist attitudes, basically. And so that was the area of Orientalism that he really dealt with. And the article on Wikipedia, the opening paragraphs on Orientalism, for me, they explain very well what's going on. So,
since the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in 1978, much academic discourse has begun to use the term Orientalism to refer to a general patronizing Western attitude towards Middle Eastern, Asian, and North African societies. Implicit in this fabrication is the idea that Western society is developed, rational, flexible, and superior.
Journalist and art critic Jonathan Jones pushed back on Said's claims and suggested that the majority of Orientalism was derived out of a genuine fascination and admiration of Eastern cultures, not prejudice or malice.
And I agree with both. I think that both Jonathan Jones has a very good point, and I think that Edward Said had a very good point. Orientalism is a very broad term because ultimately all it means is Western views of the Middle East. That's like 300 years of history usually, and many different places. Not, Austria is not the same as England, and one Austrian thinker will not have the same ideas as the Austrian thinker next door. So within the term Orientalism, we find just a spectrum, a whole diversity of different beliefs and everything. I believe as evolved human beings who have the capacity for nuance and not mere apes, we can recognize that there are multiple forms of Orientalism, the wide spectrum of Western views of the Middle East. Some of them would have been more harmless and not necessarily malicious, perhaps, only because you want to make life more exciting and imagine that there's this interesting, fascinating, mystical land. And I agree with the scholar Jonathan Jones there that it's not malicious in any way. However, we must also confront the reality that there is an Orientalism rooted in the creation of an other that serves the purposes of elevating the Western self in a notion of superiority compared to the inferior Eastern other. And we must confront that reality also, but we should have the nuance to be able to recognize that both options exist within the wide spectrum of Orientalism. And a good way to explore that is to explore the reactions to the original video, because whilst the reactions to the original video were overwhelmingly positive, some of the more negative ones reveal a lot about that latter form of Orientalism that we are going to explore in this video now. Typical brown nigger attitude. They don't even wash, but they come here telling us how to do things. Arabs bomb us and kill our people. Also Arabs, white people are so evil, they get our music wrong. If Orientalist music is based on Western music theory, why would we swap that for the barbaric Wales desert-dwelling nomads like you have the audacity to call a quote-unquote musical system?
It's really funny listening to a brown man talk down to me about culture when as a blonde-blonde white woman, the first thing he'd do if he saw me would probably be try to rape me. But yes sir, please sit there and act all civilized like you wouldn't lose control at seeing a blonde-haired female.
So sick and tired of this shit, just mass deport them already. Someone explain to those sand n***ers the civilization that gave birth to Mozart and classical music can't be expected to give a shit about desert whaling banging on sticks and stones. Tabarnak de collet, ces gens-là existent pour de vrai, c'est tabarnak. What we see in those comments is old Orientalist tropes lingering to the modern day and age. These are not simply racists waking up one day getting these ideas out of nowhere. These ideas were once the mainstream of Western societies. Back in the heyday of colonialism and everything in the 1800s and everything, white supremacy used to be the norm of these societies. 100 years ago, racial sciences, craniums were measured in order to prove why the Negro is intrinsically less intelligent than the white man. That used to be the scientific, cultural, intellectual norm of Western societies until not very long ago. When you see these ideas that Middle Eastern people are primitive, that our music is primitive, that we are violent, barbaric, these are not just random ideas that emerge out of nowhere in 2025. These are things that have a history going back a few centuries. And of course, after that time, now these elements have been cleansed away from the mainstream of Western society, but they still persist in some areas of society. The most likely groups within Western societies to still cling on to these outdated ideas tend to be people from the fringes of the far right. That usually tends to be the demographic most likely to still hold on to these notions. One of the clearest manifestations of that is the myth I have recently debunked that Islam altogether forbids music and therefore there is no such thing as music in the Islamic world, that the Middle Eastern cultures are devoid of any musical cultures due to the presence of Islam. I'm not going to go over why this myth is utterly idiotic and overly simplistic. I have an entire video on that subject that you can watch. The more important point here is the people who get angry when you debunk that myth, the people who vehemently repeat it at the top of their lungs, the ones who really want desperately this myth to be true are almost always people from far-right groups. It tends to be white nationalists. It tends to be people who, are like deport all immigrants from Europe and North America and that kind of stuff. And the reason why is very clear. These people have inherited the sense of Orientalism that is not merely a definition of the East as an exotic other, but as an inferior other to be viewed with condescension, to be regarded from the heights of Western and white supremacy. It's very obvious why such a myth would be extremely popular within those circles. The idea that Islam altogether forbids music, therefore these people don't even have a musical culture. Look at us, whilst we have Mozart and Beethoven and all these rich musical traditions, these people, they don't even have music. If you can get people to believe that Middle Easterners literally don't have music in their cultures, you're making the point of how utterly inferior and barbaric and backwards those people are when compared to you. This myth and its predominance in right-wing circles is just another extension of the still lingering version of Orientalism that is about constructing an other for us to feel superior towards. Now, before people go apeshit on me, let me clarify something. I'm not going to give you this politicized narrative that, the West is horrible and everything. The West is a civilization like any other. Every single fucking imperialistic civilization on history thought they were better than the others, and they were brutal, and they engaged in dehumanizing views of other people. Muslim, brown, Middle Eastern peoples were just as bad as white people throughout history. Have you heard about the Ottoman Empire? Just to make sure here, because I know the moment I bring up the bad things that came out of the West, people will be saying, yeah, and what about all the bad things that, the Middle East did? Yeah, I have made an entire epic symphony called the Janissary. It's a 1-hour musical epic that I financed, that I worked on, that I poured money into, that I composed music for, that is entirely about the collective psychology psychological trauma of how Christian Balkan children were kidnapped by the Muslim imperialist colonialist state that is the Ottoman Empire, and how they wrought a lot of suffering upon the people of the Balkans who were white Christians. When I was in college, we would talk about the colonialism of the early modern era, heralded by Western European powers, and there was this girl in class who says, "That is such typical white people behavior." No, you dumb moron. That's just typical human behavior. Human behaviors have a tendency to want to feel better than others. It's not something that's like a cultural facet of Western civilizations or anything like that. Put simply, all civilizations were chauvinistic assholes with a sense of superiority over others. It just so happens that the most relevant and pertinent last one was the Western civilization. Those ideas still permeate global thought processes and Western thought processes at some levels. Obviously, the average Westerner does not think like that. Obviously, that does not represent the mainstream, but they are still contained within some facets of society, within some aspects of society. So, having established that a good chunk of Orientalism, especially historically, was constituted of truly racist ideas of the Middle East rooted in a sense of the superiority of the Western self, one must now pose the question, how much of that is representative of Western media? And my answer would be, depends on when you ask. If you ask 100 years ago, I'm certain that Orientalist depictions of the Middle East would have been of the specifically racist, chauvinistic kind. However, I cannot, in good faith, as a Middle Easterner myself, who very much grew up in the West as a Westerner also, who has consumed Western media, I cannot claim that the vast majority of Western media depicting the Middle East is of the racist Orientalist type. Now, I have claimed in the previous video that almost all representations of the Middle East in Western media are Orientalistic in nature, but of the benign form of Orientalism, the kind that's just kind of dumb and they mix costumes together and everything. And this is where really you'll have a difference ultimately in opinion and in philosophy between, let's say, somebody like Hakim and I. So Hakim, his video, the argument is that Aladdin is racist, like the movie's just straight up racist. And then it really comes down to how do you define racism. My take on it is, if you're going to broaden the term racism to the point where it even includes the movie Aladdin, I think you're diluting the term at this point. Question: what do you think of the desert themes in Mario video games? I really like the one in Super Mario 64 and others. Are those stereotypical and offensive? And then I respond, let me put it to you this way. Deconstructing Mario 64 level music and deeming it offensive is the kind of approach that has destroyed the reputation of Western radical left-wing activist culture and why so many are fed up with them. If anything, the Middle Eastern characters in Aladdin are very much humanized, likable, human characters. Aladdin is a noble, kind soul. Jasmine is a strong woman, and as we are going to see in later chapters, there's such a strong idea that we Middle Easterners are completely backwards when it comes to gender roles, that we Middle Eastern men are viciously, violently misogynistic and repress our women as cattle, and that we are sexually violent. And there's ideas, as we are going to see in the next chapters, that Middle Eastern women themselves are completely brainwashed and submissive. So to see a character like Jasmine, who's like, very kind of a feminist archetype almost in the original 2D movie, I don't know, knowing how racist people can be towards the Middle East, I just cannot bring myself to view the Aladdin movie and call it racist just because, yes, it engages in a very stupid, Eurocentric, kind of nonsensical depiction of the Middle East, which, by the way, I love that aesthetic. Again, I know I've said it before in the other video, and I have to repeat it. I fucking love the Aladdin aesthetic. I think it's great. I can't get enough of it. All I've ever said was, in the future, if Disney wants to make more movies set in the Middle East, it would be cool if they're not all like Aladdin. I think that would be really cool, just for the sake of artistic diversity. At the end of the day, that's my thing. I just want more diversified artistic output in Western media. Found this video in deep dive of the Orientalist music of Aladdin. It's a show I dream to direct in the future, but as a brown person myself, we all know it's not accurate, it's just a vibe. What are your thoughts on representing it on stage? It's so anachronistic, part of me just wants to let it be so unrealistic it can't possibly be a real place. The other part of me wants to see if there's a way to make something out of the canvas that was given. And I answer, I believe the answer to your question is found in the opening disclaimer of the video. Orientalism as an aesthetic is cool and should exist. It should just not be the sole exclusive form of representation of the Middle East. I'm not looking to tear down Aladdin. I'm just making the point that not everything about MENA moving forward should always default to being like Aladdin. But Aladdin already exists, and the charm of its aesthetic is its Orientalism. No need to fiddle with that. One of the best examples to illustrate that point, in my opinion, is the difference in the portrayal of the Persian Empire between Netflix's Alexander documentary and 300. Now, the Alexander documentary by Netflix, yes, it is super Orientalist. I talked about it in the original video. It engages in like a 5-year-old's, like it's comical, the way that they had to give the Persians scimitars and turbans that, would not appear in the region until like 1,000 years later, just because, they gotta have the turbans and the scimitars because, they're the Orientals. However, with all of that said, the Persians are still portrayed as human beings.
We are Persians. We do not cower. We do not panic.
Which is more that can be said for 300. 300 literally is the definition of dehumanization. It turns the Persian Empire into the most overtly, over-the-toply comical, super barbaric hordes of literal monsters, like in the literal sense. Whilst they both fall within the spectrum of Orientalism, we have to recognize that they do not fit within the exact same place in that spectrum, and I think it would be dishonest to claim that they represent the Persians in exactly the same light. Or the Alexander movie by Oliver Stone. Yes, a lot of Orientalist nonsense in the way that it depicts the Easterners and everything. However, there are also lines like this in the movie.
To take an Asian as my queen, not a captive, is a sign of deep respect for our subjects.
What disturbs me most is not your lack of respect for my judgment. It's your contempt for a world far older than ours.
There is more respect shown to the Easterners in that 20-second clip than can be found in the entirety of the combined runtime of both 300 movies. Another bad faith interpretation of Western media that tries to present it as more racist than it actually is, at least when it comes to depictions of the Middle East, comes in that Gladiator interview that I showed, where Hans Zimmer says he wanted the sound for the Moroccan sequences to be tribal and dirty and gritty. And I saw a few people in the comments saying, oh my God, what a disgusting man. See what he says, it reveals how he views Morocco. And it's like, okay, no, like you're completely taking him out of context, because when you analyze the actual movie in context, one of the big themes of the movie is Rome is the light, everywhere else there is darkness. The Germans are not represented as any better as the Moroccans in the movie. The whole point is that the city of Rome is the light, and then the rest is pretty bad, right? So the idea that Gladiator is a racist movie, it completely falls apart when the Germans are depicted as, like, they were like Neolithic caveman clothing, and they there's a messenger sent to them and they send back the head. And this is why I maintain that nothing I talked about in the original video belonged to the racist category of Orientalism. The songs that I talked about in the original video, really, they firmly belong to the side of Orientalism that's just a naive, ignorant, uninformed desire for the Eastern other to be whatever you want it to be, and we can just mishmash it however we want it to be. We can construct this imagined other that's fantastical and fun. But none of those songs in the previous video vehiculated any notions of Middle Easterners being barbaric or, rapey or violent or civilizationally and culturally backwards. I don't want to get bogged down in the semantics of, is Aladdin racist? Yes, Aladdin is racist. No, Aladdin is not racist. It depends on how you define racism. I think it's far more worthwhile to just talk about how there's these two Orientalisms, and we can mostly agree, I think most of us, that Aladdin, the Orientalist aesthetic, the songs that we talked about in the first video, they do not belong to the Western supremacist category of Orientalism, but merely to the one that creates an other that's just there to be fantastical and we just want to have fun with it. I believe it is paramount to demarcate these different forms of Orientalism, because treating them as one and the same mischaracterizes the West and essentializes it as only having racist supremacist views of the East, which clearly it doesn't. And look, we come back to the whole semantical debate of do we call that racism or not. Myself, because of the experiences that I had and everything, I don't like extending the term to something like the Aladdin movie or the Prince of Persia games. Like, yes, the Prince of Persia games, they have this attitude of, whatever, they're all the same, Arab, Iranian, and they give the Prince of Persia what is clearly Arabian headwear. I still am not comfortable calling that racist. For me, it's a bit too strong of a word, and I think it dilutes the term if we do that. Let's agree to disagree. But where I will, however, stand my ground is to say that you cannot treat it as the same. If you want to call that racism, fine. But you cannot treat it conceptually as if it were the exact same kind of racism and the same intensity of racism as openly, shockingly, blatantly supremacist works that depict Eastern peoples as literally the inferiors of Westerners. And I think if we do not make the distinction between both, we are doing a disservice to everybody. We must remain nuanced and fair to reality no matter what. Look, here's the thing. I'm very much left-wing myself. I'm absolutely for deconstructing and calling out pieces of media when they vehiculate harmful ideas. However, I feel like sometimes the left does that a little too liberally, pardon the pun. Sometimes I feel like my side, the left, has been taken hostage by a loud vocal minority of, professional activists who live in the ivory tower of academia and everything. They're completely out of touch with the real world. And, all they have to do with their days is overanalyze and over-intellectualize pieces of media. And so how many times have I seen strong women around me that I respect for their strength enjoy a book or a movie, and then, you see some blue-haired radical fourth-wave feminist in a university saying that this movie is the most sexist thing since the invention of rape, and any woman who enjoys this book or this movie actually has internalized misogyny and doesn't realize what she's enjoying. Or the same thing, I like the Aladdin movie, and then I see like white kids in universities saying, oh, the Aladdin movie is the most racist, dehumanizing thing since like Birth of a Nation. The thing is, I'm all for calling out media when it is racist, but I will call out my fellow leftists when I feel like they're doing it in bad faith and they feel like they're doing it in a way that is like stretching to really sort of, exaggerate how much racism there is in Western media. In the original video, I was talking about how MENA should not be essentialized and oversimplified, but I believe the same thing applies to everything. I believe the West's views towards the East, Orientalism, should also not be essentialized and oversimplified. It's not true that all of the West's views towards the East are necessarily supremacist and racist and harmful. Some of them indeed are harmless and not really out of malice. What I'm literally saying is that even Orientalism does not deserve to be essentialized and oversimplified. My statement, my personal assessment of the reality of Western media is that most Western media generally leans much more towards the benign, not really racist, not really completely harmful form of Orientalism. That does not mean that the racist forms of Orientalism do not operate at the societal level, simply that they operate in other segments of society. And I absolutely believe that harmful, racist views of Middle Easterners actually exist in society because I have experienced them myself. I believe it would be unfair and inaccurate to view Western media as generally Orientalist in the racist sense. It would be equally inaccurate, however, to claim that racist Orientalism does not at all permeate society at any level. The reception to the original video was overwhelmingly positive, and I think the reason why is simple. What I was advocating for is as uncontroversial an opinion as you can find. What I argued for was that the Orientalist aesthetic, it's great, people should have the right to keep making art with that aesthetic. It should not at all be censored, and it is not intrinsically problematic or racist or anything. It just becomes problematic when it becomes the sole mode of representation of the Middle East. So what I was arguing for was that, number one, the Orientalist aesthetic, whenever it's being made, it should just be labeled as Orientalist so that people don't conflate it with the real Middle Eastern cultures. Number two, I argued that it would be better for everybody involved if eventually Western media transitions to not just using the Orientalist aesthetic to represent the Middle East, but instead actually delves into the real Middle Eastern cultures as they are from time to time. That is all I argued in the original video. And somehow some people found ways to not only disagree with that, but get angry at this, when what I'm arguing for is the most vanilla fucking take that is not going to cost anybody anything.
Frankly, we don't give a fuck about geographical accuracy. If it sounds dope, we mix it. You are not that important. Remember that. Who's we? 400,000 views in less than a week, all of them from Western countries, with a 99.99% like ratio. You do not speak for all Westerners. If you're such a sensitive snowflake that the concept Prince of Persia could have Persian music triggers you, it's on you. But don't project your mouth-breathing ignorantism on everyone else. Most Westerners are open-minded, curious, intelligent people. How much influence on YouTube do you have, Chris, with your fishing videos with 100 views? You are not that important, baby. Mwah. Who gives a shit?
As of you writing this, 889,000 people with a 99% like ratio with 23,000 subscribers gained from this video alone. In purely statistical terms, more people give a shit about this subject than there are people who give a shit about your existence. As I was receiving these negative reactions to the original video, all I could think to myself was, what are they getting angry about? Because remember, the position vehiculated in the original video is the position when the Middle East is being depicted, it would be good if it was sometimes depicted inaccurately and sometimes accurately instead of always inaccurately. This is a position of such extreme mildness that if it were to be a taste, it would be the blandest nature yogurt. So what I want to do in this chapter is identify the kind of people who would be offended by a video like the Orientalism video. The archetype of persons that would find such statements offensive and wouldn't feel the need to be defensive and hostile towards. I want to break down their psychology, because by breaking down their psychology, we can uncover more about this whole subject of the darker side of Orientalism.
The OMG, this is just woke, oversensitive stuff. You're just making a fuss over nothing crowd.
So the one scenario in which I would completely understand why some people would feel defensive was if I were to argue with a far more political leftist framework using narratives of victimhood and racism and everything. There was this comment in the original video where somebody wrote, "Thank you so much for this video. I'm a white person and I'm trying to be an ally against racism and to deconstruct racism, and I was shaking with rage watching the part about how Hans Zimmer used the Armenian duduk for North Africa. This is so dehumanizing." And I was like, dehumanizing? That's the term you went for, dehumanizing. The Armenians have just been through a genocide 100 years ago. Believe me, no Armenian currently needs a safe space because they're shaking, because they're so triggered by Hans Zimmer using a duduk to represent North Africa. Again, what were my words in the original video?
I'm happy he used the duduk for that section of the movie. However, I have to recognize, with pure honesty, despite the fact that I'm the biggest fanboy of this soundtrack, it is my favorite film soundtrack of all time, probably. I just have to recognize that, anthropologically speaking, it is quite funny and absurd to hear the duduk in Morocco.
Okay, so having established that my approach to the subject in the original video is very calm, I'm not calling the Orientalist aesthetic racist. I'm not saying that the Aladdin movie is racist. I'm not saying that it should be censored. I'm not saying that the people who made Orientalist music are racist and that they are victimizing brown people. Like, there's none of that. So having established this, what is it that they're reacting to as woke and oversensitive and an overreaction, basically? Well, it's the very things that I'm saying in the first place. They are reacting to the statement, Prince of Persia could actually use Persian culture. That is the statement that they are calling woke. It is now time for the sponsor of this video, Anusol, Quebec's #1 anal cream. Imagine a situation where somebody says, you know what, when the West depicts the Middle East, what if sometimes it depicted the actual Middle East as it is? Believe it or not, some people will actually get angry and triggered by such a statement. That is a symptom of having a little sensitive fucking butthole that starts burning the moment uncontroversial things like that are said just because they appear to be too woke. Those people are meant to take the cream. They put the cream on their finger. They put it away. They take the box and they cover their genitals with it. That way, when they have sex, they will never be able to procreate, therefore facilitating natural selection. If those easily triggered, overly sensitive fucking snowflakes start using anisole more often, maybe one day we will have a human race that doesn't have members in it who get triggered when the statement they're getting triggered by is literally, you know what? What if Prince of Persia actually included Persian culture sometimes? What I find exceedingly fascinating about the whole anti-woke crowd is that their entire claim to fame, the basis of their ideology, is that we are not easily triggered snowflakes like those people. But then there's a video that comes out and the video says the Middle East could sometimes be depicted accurately, and they lose their minds. They leave confrontational, angry, hostile comments. Who's being the snowflake here exactly? When you have a comment of this mildness, this reasonable, and you have reactions of that nature to it, who is being overly sensitive and overly triggered? What I find so funny about this whole anti-woke business is that at this point, they are completely blind to the fact that they have become the very thing that they swore to oppose in the first place. They are now, at this point, just as much a bunch of easily offended, easily triggered, oversensitive little snowflake bitches as the people that they were criticizing in the first place. Yes, the guy who says that Hans Zimmer is dehumanizing Armenians when he uses the duduk for North Africa, that's a weak, sensitive little bitch. I'm not gonna pull my punches here. I come from MENA. I have no patience for leftists who have only known the hyper-sanitized safe space of the West and who consequently formulate their reactions on that lack of perspective. I don't have any patience for them, and for the exact same reason, I have no patience for that anti-woke kind of business, because they, at this point, are just as much a bunch of easily triggered, oversensitive little snowflakes. If you get angry at somebody who claims the Middle East could sometimes be depicted accurately, then you are an overly sensitive snowflake. Because literally anybody can agree that, yeah, why not? There's nothing extreme about that statement. When people take a mild, reasonable comment and they react to it as if it were extreme, they are revealing to you that they are the extremist. Of course, it is possible that this anti-woke crowd actually sees this statement as extreme. It may be that they believe their reaction to be proportional to the severity of the original comment. And that's where you realize that they're more than mere easily triggered little snowflakes. There's something darker than this. Everything that I said in the original video, if we were to transpose it in a European context, nobody would have any problem with that. If you take everything that I said in the original video and you turn it into a European context, you would get the statement, you know, when movies are set in Ireland, it would be cool if they're not always shot in landscapes that don't look like Ireland, have the Irish wear clothing that is Russian, and have them have music that sounds like flamenco. That would be cool if more often we depicted Ireland with Irish culture. None of those people would have any problem with this. Not only that, they would react to it as if it was the most obvious, basic observation. They'd be like, yeah, no shit, why are you even bringing this up as an opinion? But suddenly, when I apply it to the Middle East, suddenly you get people rolling their eyes and huffing and puffing and going, oh my God, here we go again with the political correctness crowd. Oh my God, the easy outrage. And they don't realize that in doing so, they are the ones being overreactive. They are reacting to such a normal statement, but the fact that it is normal is lost on them simply because they cannot view the Middle East in the same way that they view the West. Those people are the most grotesquely blatant, double standard endorsing Eurocentrists you could ever imagine. None of what I said they would think of disagreeing with if it were about Europe, but just because it's about the Middle East, suddenly their Eurocentric, double standard ridden brains cannot comprehend it, and they react to it as if it were an overreaction. What I stated in the original video was, you know, Prince of Persia is about Persia, so what if it actually included Persian culture instead of Algerian culture? And I get people rolling their eyes for me saying that. Who's being oversensitive here? Do you know what's even more interesting? I have been creating videos criticizing the misrepresentation of diverse cultures for many years. I made videos criticizing the misrepresentation of Celts and Scandinavians literal years before I ever bothered making one for my people, the Middle Easterners. See, what a lot of people I think were missing when they found out about my channel from that Orientalist video is that they didn't know that this was just one video in a long series of me criticizing how cultures are oversimplified. And that mode of analysis, that criticism, I had bothered to apply it to the Scandinavians and the Celts literal years before I bothered making one for my own people. Now, do you know what's very interesting? I never received any backlash from anybody for criticizing the misrepresentation of European cultures. Nobody ever rolled their eyes and huffed and puffed and said, who cares? It's not that important. You're just looking for things to be outraged by. Never once did I ever receive that kind of reaction when it was the Slavs, when it was the Celts, when it was the Scandinavians. The only time it ever occurred. Now there's something even more interesting. When people leave comments on my YouTube videos, I can see what other comments they have left in the past. Some of the people who reacted like this negatively by going, oh my God, who cares? You're overreacting. Why? It doesn't even matter. Some of those people were people who had left positive comments thanking me for deconstructing the misrepresentation of Scandinavian or Celtic cultures before that. Some of those people, they were like, yeah, this is great content. It's really important. Like, Celts are not that simplistic. Scandinavians are not that simplistic. It's not true that Vikings were the way that pop culture describes them. And then the moment I had the audacity to do the same thing with non-European peoples, some of those same people suddenly adopted the tune of, oh my God, who cares? It doesn't even matter. You're just looking for things to be outraged by. They cared as long as it was Europeans. They thought it was a worthwhile discussion to have. But the moment I extended the exact same mode of analysis to non-European peoples, suddenly they adopted the tune of, oh my God, who cares? And they began rolling their eyes and huffing and puffing. Nobody was ever dismissive to me when it was Europeans whose correct and authentic representation I was advocating for. The only time it ever happened was when I suddenly decided to bring it outside of Europe and to apply it to brown Middle Eastern people. I do not believe that the Orientalist musical or even broadly artistic aesthetic is problematic or harmful in and of itself. Do you know what I do think is problematic and harmful in and of itself? Blatant Eurocentric double standards. And those are very fucking real. Which is why this video is sponsored by Anusa.
Group number 2. Faria Faraji is a white-hating, anti-Western bigot.
So this is what I call the concept of criticizing the West makes you an anti-white bigot, and criticizing Islam makes you an Islamophobe. Because we now live in a society of fucking children.
Lots of complaining and fronting. This guy's full of stereotypes of Westerners. He's a terrible bigot. Me during the video. Orientalism is horribly condescending to Westerners. They're not closed-minded idiots. They're intelligent people and deserve better, richer media that respects their intelligence. Yep, sounds like a terrible bigot to me. At least it would to a complete fucking moron.
Yeah, we know. White people bad.
The video. Westerners are intelligent, curious people, and the fact their media considers them too stupid to consume anything other than stereotypes is horribly condescending to them. They deserve better media. Yeah, sounds like white people bad. At least it would to an underdeveloped Neanderthal like you. Again, what were my words in the original video?
So there's a horrifyingly condescending view that Western media tends to have of its own audiences. The idea that Western audiences are so stupid that they cannot ever readjust their preconceived notions of other cultures, and so better to just feed them the same pig feed over and over again, lest they, somehow riot over how confused they are. Western media treats its audience as idiots who are too closed-minded to accept anything outside of that. I think that shows how insulting Orientalism is towards the Westerners more than anyone else.
Somebody else wrote, most Westerners prefer simplistic ideas that are not challenging, especially with music. And I responded, this isn't something unique to Westerners, it's a broadly human thing. It just so happens that non-Westerners are already exposed to Western culture and not vice versa. Yeah, clearly the words of a rabid, white-hating bigot. Somebody writes, Middle Easterners are not barbarians. Barbarians are uncivilized people in the north. And I write, I disagree. Even in antiquity, Northern Europeans had achieved great levels of cultural sophistication, like the prehistoric salt-based commercial continuum of the Celts or their great skill in metalworking. How about this comment that I wrote on the channel of the Skaldic Bard, my friend and colleague, an English white Catholic male? I wrote on his video, Skald is on his way to becoming as big a preserver of English and Germanic traditions as the likes of Tolkien. Seriously, English culture is one of the world's most fascinating and richest in my opinion, and you really are doing a wonderful job promoting it because it deserves to be promoted and celebrated for its beauty. Yeah, I'm a white-hating bigot. You know what's funny? The only reason I'm being called a white-hating bigot is because that same statement that I said about English culture, that it deserves to be promoted and celebrated for its beauty, that is literally the same argument that is the bedrock of why I made a video against Orientalism. The moment the things that I say about European cultures, I apply them to the Middle East, suddenly some people have a problem with it. Now, a very powerful counter-argument by some haters in the comments was for them to say, well, you only talk about how the West misrepresents the Middle East. You never talk about how China, for example, misrepresents the Middle East. So the fact that you only talk about the West but never bring up how Mongolia misrepresents the Middle East or how Africa misrepresents the Middle East, it shows that you hate the West. Why don't you bring them up, huh? Okay, let's break this down. In order to illustrate how completely intellectually dishonest those people are being, let me use an example that they would have no problem admitting is very real. If you studied history like I did in Canadian universities, you will hear a lot of funny takes on history that are colored by a more radical sort of left-wing perspective. We had a class on the Ottoman Empire and on the Balkans and everything, and some people in the class there was this idea circulating that, this class feels a little Islamophobic, it feels a little racist. And I'm like, what's Islamophobic and racist about it? And they're like, well, we constantly just hear about how Muslims oppressed Christians and not the other way around. It just really feels Islamophobic. And I'm like, yeah, that's not Islamophobic. That's just the reality of the circumstances. The circumstantial reality of the Ottoman Empire was that you had Muslims on top and non-Muslims were hierarchically lower than them. So of course that is going to yield a situation where most of the examples of oppression are going to come from Muslims towards Christians and not the other way around. It is extremely intellectually dishonest to look at a situation like this and say, the teachers are almost always bringing up Muslim oppression of Christians. Doesn't that reveal something about who they are as people? No, it reveals nothing about who they are as people. They have no control over the circumstantial reality of the Balkans during the days of the Ottoman Empire. It's not their fault that's just how reality is. Now, of course, here we aren't talking about oppression. We are talking about media misrepresentation. The West is the hegemonic cultural power of the world right now. Therefore, it is its cultural misrepresentations that are going to be the most influential and the more relevant to be brought up. The reason people don't bring up how Ethiopia misrepresents other cultures more often is simply because it is far less relevant to who gets influenced by it at a global level. I'm sure the Mongolians have misconceptions about us, and I know Middle Easterners have misconceptions about the Mongolians. Well, why don't you never talk about those? Because it's simply not as relevant to what I'm doing. Whenever Turkey creates depictions of other cultures that are tainted by misconceptions, those misconceptions are not going to travel very far. They're mostly going to remain local. Similarly, if Mongolians mischaracterize Middle Easterners in their media, nobody's really going to see it. It's mostly going to remain local. But whenever Westerners depict other cultures in a way that is tainted by their misconceptions, those misconceptions are going to propagate themselves throughout the entire world because the West simply is the cultural hegemon of the planet. The reason why I specifically focus on Western media's misrepresentations is because the misconceptions that people have internationally almost always correlate with Western media and are caused by Western media. But morons, what they hear in that is me saying the West is evil, the West is bad. No, I'm just pointing out a correlation due to the simple facts. My goal with this channel is to minimize misconceptions vehiculated by media. And because of the circumstantial reality of the world that I have no control over, this means that I will always have to target Western media in my criticisms more than any other media. Imagine, however, that in an alternate universe, my channel was about minimizing the risks of potential religiously motivated terrorist attacks that are rooted in religious radicalization. And I would do so by debunking religious radicalization. In this scenario, almost all of my videos would be about Islam. Now, in this scenario, a bunch of disingenuous, bad faith people would come to me and say, why the specific focus on Islam? You're afraid of religions that can cause violent terrorist attacks, and you keep bringing up Islam more than any other. Where's your videos on Zoroastrianism? The fact that you are not worried about Zoroastrianism's potential religious radicalization that may lead to terrorist attacks shows that you have a bigoted, racist view of Islam. You're an Islamophobe. And my answer to those people would be, you do not live in the real world. Every group out there, every tribe out there, every form of identity out there has facts associated with it that happen to be unflattering. And we can either accept them or be little children and try to blame the people reporting those facts and try to claim that they are manipulating reality. That's what immature children do. Which is why this video is sponsored by Anus.
Group number 3, just the straight up racist low.
As we have established, racism is still real. And when it comes to Orientalism and views of the Middle East, some of these archaic views rooted in the supremacist type of Orientalism, they have not died out yet. They are still being maintained by some sectors of society. Some of the people who reacted the way that they did to my original video, as evidenced by the comments that we saw in the beginning, the reason why they're offended is that the video's claim is that Western media would be enriched with the inclusion of actual Middle Eastern cultures. We are dealing with a demographic of people who have inherited a philosophy that Middle Easterners are a primitive, barbaric, uncivilized bunch. To them, few things are as offensive as the idea that Middle Eastern culture can enrich Western media. Few claims and opinions could be as fundamentally offensive to such people as that one. The thumbnail of the original video alone is enough to be the most offensive possible thing to such people. The tragedy of a Western stereotype overshadowing an ancient and rich musical tradition. Just me calling Middle Eastern music rich, just me calling it ancient, just me calling it developed and sophisticated is an insufferable offense to some people. I get comments all the time, not just on this Orientalist video, mind you, on other videos of people calling me ethnic slurs, racial slurs, calling me names, insulting me, insulting my family, saying that we're all barbarians, that we should all be deported, because I specifically dared to state that Middle Eastern musical traditions are advanced and rich and sophisticated. That statement alone is of the utmost offense to people who desperately need to cling to the notion that they are superior to all other cultures in every possible way.
What disturbs me most is not your lack of respect for my judgment. It's your contempt for a world far older than ours.
One of the very common reactions by haters and detractors of the original video was, well, what about the Middle Eastern misrepresentations of Western culture? We're going to act like Middle Easterners know the West better than we know the Middle East. Middle Easterners are ignorant about the West just as we are ignorant of the Middle East. And it's like, what world are you living in? According to those people, English is not the primary language of the world that everybody is more familiar with than the other way around. What I'm pointing to with this example is that those people are denying a very basic aspect of our current planetary reality, which is the soft power of certain areas that have become the globalized culture. According to those people, Western culture is not the globally hegemonic one. There's a reason why Anglophones tend to get a bad rep in the rest of the world. When Americans go to Europe, when they go to Poland, the Polish have some idea of what they're saying. The inverse is very rarely true. When English speakers come here in Quebec, we all know how to speak the English, maybe we got the accent here in Quebec and but we all understand at least what they're saying. Ontarians don't understand us, like English Canadians like to act like, well, they're French speaking and we're English speaking, we're no different. No, we're all bilingual here in Quebec. We all speak both. You're the ones who don't speak our language, okay? It's not a two-way street. That's how hegemony works. The English are on top. That's why they're more ignorant, whilst we don't get to be that ignorant. Because we're surrounded by an English-speaking ocean, we just have to speak both languages. And the same applies with understanding of Western cultures around the rest of the world. The people acting like this is a perfect two-way street and that Middle Easterners are just as equally ignorant of the West as Westerners are of the Middle East, these people are living in a state of utter and complete denial in terms of the soft power, cultural, and media dynamics of the West versus other regions of the world. Everybody around the world experiences Western culture. Everybody is intimately familiar with Western culture. Everybody grows up watching Western media and consuming Western media. Yeah, Western music at this point is almost as native a form of music to us as it is to the Westerners. We literally grew up with it to the same degree as our musical traditions, and the same applies to almost all Western. We all watch Lord of the Rings. We all watch Braveheart. We all know Mel Gibson. We all know Tom Cruise. All of your movie stars are also our movie stars. Iran, Turkey, Azerbaijan, among other countries in that region, all have national symphonic orchestras because we literally play the Western classical repertoires. Every musician who studies music in the Middle East will be taught Western music theory. My uncle, from the beginning of the first video, yes, he studied Iranian music theory because he went to the conservatory. It's part of the curriculum. But he's a Western musician. He's a contrabass player. I come from a family of musicians. Half of the musicians in my family are exclusively Western classical musicians. To hear, you have no idea who Beethoven is like, are you... Holy fuck, the ignorance is insane. As I stated in the pinned comment of the original video, if you go to the Middle East, you name the great classics of the Western repertoire, you name names like Mozart, Kettleby, Beethoven, etc. Everybody's going to know what you're talking about. But then go to the West, Western musicians, and say Dimitri Cantemir, Sheida. Give them the names of musical forms like California or Peshrev. Good luck finding one who actually knows what any of these terms mean. This is what cultural hegemony rooted in soft power dynamics looks like, a completely asymmetrical relationship. You know what an average evening in Tehran looks like? You go pick up your friend at his classes where he's learning how to play the violin, and you go to your apartment, you order some pizza, and then you watch Stranger Things. Yes, that is literally the average evening for people my age in Tehran. And to see how some Westerners cannot even conceive of that as a possibility, but they imagine that like we live, we're like, they're banging fucking rocks in the sand, on our camels, and then we're like completely oblivious to the existence of the world. We're like, somebody comes and says Leonardo DiCaprio, we're like, what? Who is Leonardo DiCaprio? And then we see a guitar and we're like, This is footage that I recorded in Tehran. My grandfather, he was a music teacher at one of the academies of music in Tehran. He literally taught Western music theory and Western classical music. Beware some of the footage you're going to see. It is going to be quite shocking to some people.
از این خیلی ساده از ارتباطش دیگه چجوری تو درست حسابی چند
سلام مهندس، حالت خوبه؟ خواستم بدم تو داشتی بزرگ میشدی موزیسینا رو که دوست داشتی کیا رو خیلی دوست داشتی تو؟
اجرای کارایان رو گوش کنیم با دنیل برنبوی این دوتا
عربه دنیل بلنبوی؟
نه دنیل بلنبوی آرژانتینی الاصل منتها یهودی اسرائیلی اما
نه نفهم. مگه تو خاورمیانه مگه به چیزای از بیرون خاورمیانه گوش میدن مردم؟ اصلا میدونن که نیلی کجاست؟ سلام نیلی جان، خوبی؟ ببین تو بزرگ داشتی میشدی تو ایران، موزیسین رو که دوست داشتی میدادی کی بودن مثلا؟
دپیچمود دیگه، آخه بستگی داره، نانیشنل، لدزپلین، جیمی هندریکس، ددور.
یه فقط موسیقی یزدی گوش نمیدادی؟ مال یزدی تو؟
اصلا گوش نمیدادم موزیک سنتی، موزیک ایرانی اصلا.
واقعا؟ یعنی ایرانی‌ها وجود دارن که موسیقی غربی رو فقط من فکر کنم که ایرانی‌ها فقط با رو شتراشون به موسیقی اذان و شهرام شب گوش میدادن.
من یکی و من و دوستام اصلا گوش نمیدادیم.
یعنی اصلا چی واسه گفتی که تو کل گروه دوستات اصلا موسیقی ایرانی گوش نمیدادین؟ یعنی چی فیلم امریکایی هم نگاه میکردین؟
فقط فیلم امریکایی نگاه میکردیم، یعنی فیلمای هالیوود و هر چیز بود، فیلم ایرانی کی نگاه میکرد؟ گفتم موزیک کلاسیک هم جزو چیزای اصلی بود که گوش میدادیم، دوباره کنسرت‌های موسیقی کلاسیک رو میرفتیم.
خب مگه ارکستر دارن تو ایران؟ مگه وجود داره ارکستر؟ کارن مگه تو ارکستر سمفونیک تهران بود مگه؟ نه با من فکر کنم که تو کویر عود میزد رو شترش.
ارکستر سمفونیک تهران خب 100 سالش الان دیگه، یعنی مثل که الان 102 سالش شده. منظورم که از خیلی از کشور اروپایی حتی اندازه ارکستر سمفونیک تهران قدمت ندارن.
ببین کارم باشه، ببین ما دفعه بعدی هم دیگه دیدیم، چون شما ایران بزرگ شدیم. من میخوام یه غذا رو به نام همبرگر، خیلی براتون جذاب میشه این همبرگر. باشه دیگه، خداحافظ. کوسکوس فلافل، الله اکبر.
And then some great geniuses came up with a very brilliant counter-argument. They kept pointing to, what about the American-themed restaurants in Japan? They are proof that the rest of the world misunderstands the West as badly as the West misunderstands the rest of the world. And I'm like, you're proving my point. What are the stereotypes in those American restaurants? American stereotypes. That's the point that these people are missing. They think that what I was complaining about in the first video is that Orientalism reduces Middle Eastern cultures to stereotypes. Orientalism doesn't even do that because Orientalism can't even get the fucking stereotypes right. In order to be able to use these Japanese restaurants as a functional counter-argument to my first video, to make it appear like it's a two-way street, those American-themed Japanese restaurants would need to have like an Italian guy going Mamma Mia, a Colosseum, and a Soviet guy dancing with Austrian folk music. Then it would remotely begin looking like how Orientalism treats the East. I wouldn't have any problem if Western media always caricatured Middle Eastern cultures. The problem is their caricatures are not even functional caricatures. See, here's what's happening. I'm the Middle Eastern guy, and then there's a white guy, and we're both going to, those people who make like those caricatures in the streets, like they make the drawings, and the guy takes the face of the Western guy, of the white guy, he takes that face and exaggerates that face. It's still recognizably the same face. You can clearly see there is some level of accuracy, but it's oversimplified and kind of like exaggerated. And then it's my turn to get my caricature, and the guy gives me a drawing that looks like a typical South Indian male with like super dark brown skin, and they have like a super straight short hair. And I look at it and I'm like, that's not funny. And then the other guy goes, oh my, it's a caricature for you. Stop being so sensitive. It's like, no. It's not about being sensitive. I'm not offended. I just find this cringe because a caricature, in order to be funny, has to be an exaggeration of the real thing. Imagine if your friend looks like this and then the guy who draws a caricature gives them this. Like, that's not... In order for a caricature to be funny, it has to be an exaggeration of the real thing, not a complete departure from the real thing. Otherwise, it's just kind of like awkward and cringe and makes no sense. You would think that if a caricature was made of me, the first thing people would go for is the curly hair. Like, that's my most famous salient feature. If a caricature artist doesn't give me the long curly hair, but instead gives me short black hair, at that point, it's like they are failing at the most basic level at being a good caricature artist. The caricature is failing at being a caricature at the most basic level because the person can't even get the most basic salient features right. This is what Orientalist depictions of the East feel like to us. To call them caricatures is giving them way too much credit. That's an insult to caricatures because they're not even functional as caricatures. When Western media depicts Asian countries, it will tend to utilize elements from North Africa, which is literally another continent. Orientalism can't even get the continents right. Yeah? Well, how about the American-themed Japanese restaurants, huh? They have Uncle Sam and the Statue of Liberty and American flags. How is it any different? Hello, yes, this is God, creator of the universe. How can I help you? Listen, humanity, that was a fucking mistake. Can you please send the asteroid our way? I'm talking DHL Express. I'm talking very fast, okay? Not even pure later. I'm not fucking around. Orientalism doesn't caricature Iran by exaggerating its attributes. It just ignores those attributes and slaps onto it Arabic and Indian features. You know what the best example of this is? Here is when Western media, written by a writer who has studies, who is educated, who is from a well-off Seth MacFarlane, an educated, rich person who has lived in the cities. He's not some rural guy. He is the cream of the top of the West. He makes a joke about how Persian sounds, and that is the joke.
Cause it's Shalem Mami with Zechech Malech on 103.2, the Hach.
Oh my god, you guys are so sensitive. It's just a joke. Yeah, that's the thing. The reason we're not laughing is not because we're offended. It's because it fails as a joke. Literally, the most famous aspect of the Persian language in Middle Eastern circles is how soft it sounds. Writing the Persian language as a kind of sound is literally, is exactly the equivalent of a caricaturist drawing a caricature out of me and then giving me short, straight hair. It's like, how hard can you fail at the caricature? To give you an idea, as an Iranian myself, what this skit sounds like to me is this. I shouldn't have stayed up all night listening to Italian radio. Hello, this is Vladimir Bogalov of the Italian radio. Here the fucking morons are gonna be like, oh my god, you're so sensitive. Again, I'm not offended because he's making fun of the accent, because guess what? I'm always making fun of the Iranian accent.
I like the Spider-Man. Have you seen the Spider-Man movie? I am going to eat the gourmet sabzi while watching the Spider-Man movie.
Do you know why Greeks love it when I make fun of their accent? Because I'm actually doing a Greek accent.
Lipon, you probably know Faria Faradji, the owner of this channel. He's the Canadian piece of shit.
Only thing I have to say is that you absolutely nailed the Greek accent without a doubt. You can't possibly have such a good Greek accent. Once I heard the Lipon, I was sure I was hearing a compatriot. The Greek accent is as accurate as if he was a native speaker. Faria's performance of Aristoxenos is his greatest masterpiece yet. Now, contrasting Seth MacFarlane's joke, here is what a random Pakistani dude sounds like when he is doing an impression of a Western language. Mind you, this is not a media person, this is not a millionaire, this is not somebody who has a network behind him, the education that Seth MacFarlane had, the team that Seth MacFarlane has, or the budget, or anything like that. This is one Pakistani guy. Pakistan, one of the more underdeveloped countries in this kind of Oriental, Eastern, Middle Eastern region.
Pakistan, today we have to the border in Afghanistan, we near have to the Afghani OCC border area. We have to the rocket launcher firing after the people 35 to the block.
Everybody in the comments of that video agrees that whilst it's complete gibberish, and obviously he doesn't know a lick of English probably, he's actually getting the sound right. As far as a caricature goes, he's managing to get the caricature, the sound of American English, pretty spot on. Multi-millionaire media writer-directors with networks and budgets and influence and educations behind them cannot remotely get a basic aspect of Eastern civilizations right. Meanwhile, a random dude in a rural region of one of the most underdeveloped parts of this region of the world can get their impression of the West right. This is what one-sided cultural hegemony looks like. This is what happens when one portion of the world wields extreme cultural presence in the rest of the world, whereas the other is not true. To act like Orientalism is a two-way street and that there exists a perfectly symmetrical counterpart to Orientalism in the Orient is mind-bogglingly ignorant. So am I claiming that the average Middle Easterner, they all have a super well-informed understanding of the West? No. Am I saying that they do not have a stereotypical understanding of the West? Again, no, they do have a stereotypical understanding of the West, but at least their stereotypes can be placed in the correct continent. At least they can get the continent right. At least they can get the culture right. When Iranians make jokes about Italians, they're not going, haha, those Italians with their snowy fjords and IKEA meatballs and flamenco music. No, at least they can get pizza, Colosseum, Leonardo da Vinci, spaghetti. And again, these are reductive stereotypes, but that's the thing. It is still miles beyond the understanding that Western culture and Western media has of Middle Eastern cultures. Yeah, I'm a Palestinian American, and I have always been so disappointed when friends would joke about my culture by playing the awful Orientalist meme music and expecting me to laugh. It's not the joke that bothers me, it's the fact that they're using something like that as a parody when it's not even accurate as a caricature. And I reply, this. I get jokes like, oh, Faria, Iranian, eating hummus all day long, huh? And when I tell them the joke is cringe because hummus is Levantine Arab, they resort to the, it's just a joke, dude. But then I explain to them, I'm not offended. I love ethnic jokes. It's not being offended that makes me not laugh at your joke. It's the fact that your joke fails at comedy. Ethnic jokes are funny when they exaggerate the truth about a culture, they just don't land otherwise. It would be like teasing an Irish guy about IKEA and meatballs. The joke doesn't land if you're teasing an Irish guy about Swedish cultural attributes, it's just cringe. I'll take a racist, offensive joke that's actually good over a cringe one any day.
So the thing that a lot of people, especially Americans, don't realize is that this isn't a phenomena exclusive to Eastern countries or Asian countries or anything like that. What they have done to your music is also how they treat a lot of smaller white countries and their culture and heritage as well. When is the last time you've actually seen anything to do with actual Danish culture that isn't Vikings or Nordic mythology? We are never represented in any other way except in the stereotypical fashion. Same with Irish, Welsh people, etc. It just seems to me that a lot of people get hyper-fixated on Eastern culture being misrepresented, but they have no idea that this is happening to lots of other cultures as well. Hope you see this.
Extremely weak response. Western cultures are definitely misrepresented. You can thank me for the many video essays I've made addressing the misrepresentation of European cultures, including yours as a Scandinavian. But you are claiming that the level of misrepresentation Orientalism engages in is the same as that suffered by Western countries. That is a bold-faced lie. When is the last time you saw Denmark represented with flamenco music, Texas cowboy clothing, Kremlin Russian architecture, and them having Italian names? That is the level of misrepresentation Orientalism engages in with Eastern cultures. Well, we Danes are always reduced to Vikings and Nordic mythology. You are proving my point. Western pop culture at least manages to reduce you Danes to a stereotype of your own culture. You are Nordic. Your ancestors were Vikings. Being reduced only to some parts of your culture isn't optimal, but it is far more accurate than pop culture treating you the same as Spain and Russia. Orientalism treats the cultural attributes of Armenia and Morocco, two countries in different continents, as interchangeable, and you compare this to Denmark being reduced only to some aspects of Denmark's culture. Calling the greater attention brought to Eastern culture's misrepresentation hyperfixating is extremely dishonest. People are fixating on it more than with Western cultures, deservedly so for very valid reasons, because non-Western cultures get misrepresented to an incomparably worse degree, which generates a greater response relative to the severity of the misrepresentation. This is part of the pinned comment from the original video. The reason why it's mostly a one-way street and non-Westerners are generally better at representing the West than the other way around is because the West is currently the hegemon of this planet in terms of cultural soft power. Therefore, everyone around the world is intimately familiar with the generalities of Western culture because everyone is exposed to it. The average Iranian who lived in Tehran all their life can tell an English accent is distinct from Scottish, and they do associate received pronunciation British with posh. They do know the organ is a church instrument and that the banjo does not sound fancy. Typical Western associations are well known to the average Iranian in Tehran. All musicians around the world know the basics of Western music. We all do chords, harmony, play the piano and guitar. Meanwhile, only a tiny fraction of Western musicians learn any music theory outside of their own. There is a reason why Western musicians are the only ones to call their ethnic music theory, whilst everywhere else, even between them, people preface their music theory with the cultural specifier like Iranian music theory, Japanese music theory, etc. I am aware that this presents a rather unflattering picture of the West, but please understand that this is not a consequence of us non-Westerners being oh so wiser. I'm not trying to portray Westerners as inherently bad or evil. If we were the cultural hegemons of this planet, we would be just like that. In 500 years, if China or Brazil become the next superpower, they'll be the ones generally ignorant about other cultures, whilst everyone else knows about them. Average Westerners are not ignorant by default. They simply naturally embody the traits of a region with hegemonic global cultural influence. Look, the undeniable fact is nearly every single Turkish musician in Istanbul and every single Iranian musician in Tehran can play Western instruments and knows how to play Western music. On the other hand, very few, like an absolute minute statistical aberration of Western musicians are able to play any music outside of their own tradition. But that fact is not a commentary or a statement on our nature as human beings. All it reveals is the circumstances we happen to be experiencing at this current moment in time. And so if there's a hypothetical situation where, let's say, a Middle Eastern musician comes to you, a white Western musician, and says, I can play both your music and my music, but you can only play your own music. I'm better than you. You should feel ashamed that I'm proud of myself. That person is a fucking moron. There is nothing to be proud of on our end, and there's nothing to be ashamed of on your end. We are simply living out circumstances that we have no control over. One of my favorite songs, it's from Rammstein. It's one of my favorite bands, it's this German band, and they made this song called We're All Living in America. And basically it's about globalization. We're all living in America. And the funny thing is, no Westerner will ever disagree with this. Many of the haters of the original video were Europeans, and Europeans are constantly remarking on the existence of this soft power dynamic when it concerns the US in relation to them. All the time Europeans are talking about how dumb and ignorant Americans are because of that soft power dynamic. They will readily point out that we Europeans, we know how to speak English, we know American culture, but they come to our countries, they don't speak our language, and they don't know our cultures. Some of those same people who were angry at the video, they're the same Europeans who will readily admit the existence of those soft power dynamics, but the moment they are asked to admit that, more broadly speaking, as Westerners, they are in the same position towards the rest of the world that Americans are in relation to them, suddenly they go into denial of the existence of this soft power dynamic. Some people in the comments of the original video asked, your thumbnail says the tragedy. Where's the tragedy exactly? What's so tragic? Well, what's so tragic is that so many Westerners automatically jumped to the response of, yeah, well, Middle Easterners are just as ignorant of us as we are of them. They assume that this has to be the case because they could not fathom any other reality, because that's the only reality that Westerners know. A complete detachment from most of the rest of the world. So many people responded to the original video with the confident assumption that, well, surely Middle Easterners and Asians and Africans also get our music wrong and do weird mishmashes, and they have no idea that a balalaika is Russian, and they'll just slap it on Scotland, right? And the fact that those people jumped to these conclusions with such confidence is so tragically sad to me. because they do not realize how unique and how lonely they are in that position. That is all they have ever experienced, and so they jump to the conclusion that surely that's how it must be for everyone else. Due to the hegemonic status of Western soft power, everyone around the world simultaneously, systematically experiences both their local media and Western media. Westerners are the only people on the planet who, with very few exceptions, are limited only to their own media. So many people in the comments of the original video assume that, well, surely it's a two-way street. Surely they have no idea what our culture is. And the entire basis upon which they predicated that assumption is simply the fact that they could never name you a single Middle Eastern composer. Their entire argument was, well, I couldn't ever name a single Middle Eastern composer, so surely they must not be able to name a single Western composer, right? And people asked, where's the tragedy in all of this? There. That is our tragedy. And now here's what's gonna happen. The clowns in the comments are gonna go, yeah, well, there's a reason why you guys all play our music. There's a reason why Beethoven's pictures are found in your musical academies and why you play our Western classical music, but that we don't have pictures of your composers in our academias and why we don't play your music. It just shows that you intrinsically recognize that we are the superior culture. Why is Beethoven's picture in your academia, but your composer's pictures are not in our academia? Because simply you are recognizing at a subconscious level that we are the superior culture. The reason why Western culture is the globally dominant one is because it is superior and everybody wants to have a part of it. Of course, it has nothing to do with the fact that the West is the ultimate political power of the world right now. It has nothing to do with its political weight. It has nothing to do with the spread of the British Empire. No, even if the West was a completely local culture and Latin America was the super dominant hegemonic power of the world, even then it wouldn't change anything. Iranians would still have pictures of Beethoven. It's a complete coincidence. You know, every single time in history, when one culture was more influential than others, and all cultures in the local region were under the influence of that culture, it was always synonymous with the politically powerful culture. Why did everybody start speaking Latin? Not because the Roman Empire was politically powerful, no! It's just because they all recognized that Latin was the superior language to Gaulish and Carthaginian and Celto-Iberian. It has nothing, no, the fact that the Roman Empire was the power, no, that's just a coincidence. That's just a coincidence. Even if there was no Roman Empire, everybody would have still started speaking Latin around that part of the world. They will first go for the, well, it's a two-way street. And when you show them that it's not a two-way street, they're gonna go, well, it shows that we are superior. That's why you all know our culture. Now, having established the moronic aspect of this reaction, there's actually a very constructive and very informative response, which is some people remarking that the very same phenomenon of misrepresentation that we call Orientalism, this one also occurs when it comes to pretty much every culture that is not Western European or derived from Western Europe. So Australia, North America would also be in that category. Eastern Europeans also get misrepresented. The Balkans also get the same kind of misrepresentation. Other Europeans who are not Western Europeans get the same kind of misrepresentation. And then everybody else, the Chinese, the Latinos and everything. And so a lot of Latinos were, for example, like the same version exists for us where we're all Mexicans and all Mexican music is mariachi. Which, by the way, mariachi is just one genre and one form of the many diverse styles of Mexican music that exist. It's not the entirety of Mexican music by far. And then you'll have some Western media where they go to Colombia, the actors chosen were Mexican actors who have Mexican accents. And one of the most interesting parts about this is this Orientalism of other cultures also applies to Western European cultures of the past. That's what I find very interesting. There's this quote that the past is a foreign country. The idea is that basically medieval France of the 1200s was as foreign to modern France as Algeria is foreign to modern France. So the past is a foreign country. The whole thing with this Orientalist aesthetic is that artists can get away with coming up with completely fantastical, completely nonsensical remixes of reality only if their audience is sufficiently unfamiliar with it, right? So a lot of people like to live in this little reality where they act like, no, it's just creativity. It's not just creativity. It's also the ignorance of the audiences. Because if it was only creativity, then Hans Zimmer would just as easily be using American banjo music to represent the Soviet Union. The reason it doesn't do that with Western media, but that he can do the same thing when it comes to the duduk in Morocco, is because his audience is sufficiently unfamiliar with it. Audience lack of familiarity is a fundamental ingredient that allows for those kind of more inventive, creative aesthetics to emerge. And the thing is, modern Westerners are pretty much as unfamiliar with their medieval past as they are with the modern Middle East. Medieval Europe is a foreign country, and so it gets the exact same treatment as the Middle East. And that's why I made an entire video called Bardcore. Bardcore is the Orientalist music, the vague vibes music based on general unfamiliarity and creativity. It is the Orientalism of the Middle Ages. And once again, doesn't mean it's bad. Orientalist music sounds great, Bardcore music sounds great, but effectively they showcase the same phenomenon. So the Orientalist aesthetic, the same thing applies to medieval Europe. Medieval Europe is just as badly represented as the modern Middle East is, as long as a certain cultural reality and a certain context is sufficiently unfamiliar with a certain audience. Artists and creatives operating in that audience will be able to get away with being far more creatively loose with it, and that is always going to happen, which is not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if it starts obscuring the reality. But there's another point that I want to make, which I find even more interesting. We talked about how there's the Orientalism, that is the being creatively loose with an other just so that that other can be cool and exciting, and it can be whatever we find to be exciting. And then there's the racist, chauvinistic view of the other that is rooted in us feeling superior to them. And that also applies to medieval Europe. See, the chauvinism and the racism that emerged in the 19th century in Victorian England and France and everything, it wasn't only directed at non-Western countries. It was also directed at Western countries of ages past. That's when we got the whole idea that the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages, that they were people who did not wash. The whole fucking bullshit about, oh, don't leave the baby in the bathwater, they only washed once a year, which is complete and utter misrepresentation. The fact that they were barbaric, that they were unlearned, that they were uncivilized and everything. And once again, I've always stood up for the medieval Europeans. I've always said it is crazy to regard medieval Europeans as a bunch of morons when they are the people who invented this, they are the people who created this, they're the people who composed La Messe de Notre Dame, one of the shining jewels of human music as far as I am concerned. I have always stood up for the fact that medieval European music was every bit as complex and as sophisticated as modern Western European music. It was just complicated and sophisticated in a different manner. But for over 2 centuries, modern Western Europeans shat on medieval Europeans, said that their music was primitive, said that their architecture was shit, said that they were primitive and cognitively and culturally impaired as people. The same things that have been said about Middle Easterners, medieval Europeans were included within the same kind of rhetoric, the literal same kind of things, that they were more barbaric, that they were more rapey, that they don't wash. The exact same attributes have been given to the medieval Europeans. So I find it very funny when morons accuse me of creating this anti-white hostility, and that somehow I'm operating on a framework of non-white people against white people, because I'm like, my brother in stupidity. We are all in the same boat here, including a lot of whites. Maybe not the modern Western whites and the modern North American and Australian whites, certainly all the whites from before the early modern era. They also got shat on by the exact same chauvinistic processes that also defecated on us Middle Easterners and other non-Western people. We're all in this together, including a lot of white people. Orientalism is ultimately one broader expression of a fundamental, far more universal phenomenon, which is that when people are sufficiently unfamiliar with a certain other, they can begin inventing whatever they want within that other and turn it into whatever they want it to be. And if they want to be creative with it by turning it into an exciting mystical thing for them to fetishize, they will do that. And sometimes they will do that, but also add onto it attributes that allow them to feel superior to it. So Orientalism is not a unique phenomenon. It is only one expression of a broader phenomenon, and the exact same phenomenon has applied, in fact, to medieval Europe.
Since we're talking about the bardcore video in the Middle Ages, you guys remember Lukum, the little white cat from that video? You wouldn't believe how fast they grow up.
ما چی می‌کنی ما چی می‌کنی منو لایا 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 بوش بوش بوش
Lyra has a few words about the haters in the previous video. Lyra, what do you have to say to the haters in the previous video? Whoa. Okay, no, YouTube's gonna have to censor that. Like, like that's racial slurs. You don't say that.
All right, now we have reached the unpleasant part of the video. Yay! So I'm not looking forward to this because this is the part where I'm going to be opening up about my personal experiences with racism, and I'm not looking forward to this because, number one, I'm a very private person. I hate it when people know anything about my private life. And also because I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for it. I know that some people are going to be like, oh, you're just doing this for sympathy and you just want like attention. And yeah, if it was the case, I would have done that 3 years ago. I already had 100,000 subscribers. I had a big audience that would hear me vent about my problems and everything. The reason I'm doing this in this video specifically is because, you know, for once I'm not like an outsider analyzing a foreign thing. I'm not talking about Scandinavian traditional music, the internal psychology of Greek culture and how they cope with being Eastern and Western. Like, for once, I am the thing that I'm talking about. You know, I actually have the insider's perspective. This video is about the supremacist forms of Orientalism in relation to the Middle East, and I've actually experienced firsthand what some of these supremacist ideas, what some of these views of Middle Easterners as inferior, I've experienced what it does to people, what it did to me, and I feel like it would be stupid of me not to use that opportunity now that for once I actually have the insider's perspective. And also because, you know, you can talk as much as you want at a theoretical level about, oh, racism and viewing other people as inferior. When you get an idea of what these concepts look like in action, when they actually express themselves as boots on the ground in real life tangible situations, I think then you understand what those concepts are much better than if you just list them as like these ethereal concepts. Once you see them in action and you have an idea of what they look like in individual situational circumstances, I think it sheds light on the entire subject that we're talking about. And so I just want to make it clear that I'm not hijacking the channel to, you know, vent about the racist experiences that I had. I've had a lot of them and it's fine. But the ones that I'm going to talk about in this video are specifically going to be the ones that I think will be relevant to the subject of this video and will give some of the viewers a more profound, better understanding of what we're talking about broadly in this video. Now, I understand completely some of you feel like that's not what I subscribe to you for, that's not the kind of content that I want from you, and that's fine. If all you wanted was the usual video essay kind of stuff, well, it's over now, you've had it. The video essay, you know, the kind of normal content that I usually do, it's done, it's over now, and I'm going to be opening up about personal experiences. So it's completely fine if you don't want to watch this part because you feel like that's not what I subscribe to you for. I completely understand. You don't owe me your empathy, you don't owe me your sympathy, it's fine. But I'm keeping this part of the video as optional for the people who maybe want to have a better understanding of what racist Orientalist views are like and how they can actually affect somebody in a tangible sense. I just want to warn you, progressively as we go into the chapter, things are going to get heavier and you know, we're going to go into heavier and heavier subjects, and so you just need to be ready for that. Trigger warning, because this is going to be a heavy chapter. In my personal experience, this kind of racism has always overlapped with the concept of sexual assault. So you've had your trigger warning. If this is not something you want to hear about, just jump to the next chapter or just click away from the video. but this part is going to get a little heavy. Okay, so the first anecdote that I'm going to give you, and it's not like the earliest one, it's not the first one, because the first one that ever occurred to me was 12 years ago. This one is actually only 3 years ago. I was in Santorini in Greece, and I was filming the clip for Armenaki. I'm starting with this one because it's kind of gonna, in a weird way, set the mood for the general theme going forward into the chapter. Anyway, so it's my last night on Santorini. The ferry leaves at like 3 in the morning for the port of Piraeus in Athens. And so I'm staying up all night. At around 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm walking towards the bus station of Santorini to go to the ferry afterwards. And so at that time, you know, the street is completely deserted, but there's only a handful of other people, namely 4 white French girls or maybe Belgian girls and an older white man, like over there. What a lot of people don't know, and what the girls did not know, is that I am a French speaker. I grew up in Quebec most of my life. I am as culturally Quebecois as I am Iranian. French is my first language, but the girls did not know that, obviously. So I'm just walking there, and I'm just walking towards the bus station, and I hear the girls talking, and at some point I hear them mentioning me, and they start saying, you know, in their beautiful European French accent, je suis pas trop à l'aise là, regarde le gars il nous suit depuis quelques temps et tout, on va faire attention, il fait un peu arabe là, on va se placer là-bas, on va juste faire attention. And so they get closer to the white guy over there, basically to the older white man, because, as they said, il fait un peu arabe et tout, and that made them feel uncomfortable. And I was not shocked, I was not surprised. This is not the first time it happened in my life. I am more than used to this trope of the Middle Eastern brown man being a very high potential threat to the white woman. Unfortunately, this is something that I'm more than used to, as you're going to see very soon in the rest of the chapter. I didn't do anything. I was just walking. I was going towards the bus station, but simply existing in their physical vicinity with my phenotypes, that was enough to make those poor white women feel unsafe. And so they strategically got closer to the older white man just to feel more safe. And I didn't want to make it too obvious that I understood what they were saying. I keep walking for a bit, and then I stop, and then I turn around, and I do a few calls. I find a taxi at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, I make it to the ferry, it's fine. And a lot of people back then, in 2022, they told me, oh, you were just paranoid. Why did you, turn away? It's not like they were gonna call the police on you or anything. And that's where I was like, well, I beg to differ, actually. I have my own life experiences. The people who told me that I was paranoid and overreacting, well, first, they did not know my past, but interestingly enough, they also did not know my future. And I also did not know my future, but what I had feared that night came to pass 6 months later, because in December of 2022, I was accused by a racist white woman in a street of having tried to sexually assault her. This occurred in December of 2022 in the old town of Quebec City. My mom and I, we were in the old Quebec, and we're doing a clip for the song Martin La Chasse Galerie. We're in a street, we're doing one of the shots, my mom presses record, but as she presses record, 2 people appear. There's one white woman in her 20s, 30s, and her father, seemingly her father at least, who's like holding her, and she looked kind of drunk and everything. Actually, she was just high off her mind on some very potent drugs. And this is the interaction that occurs.
We'll wait.
No.
We'll wait.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can go. No, I'm not going to be
We don't want to be in the background.
photo.
Okay. It's not a photo, it's a video.
You can
You're
pass because
Muslim, right?
we're not filming until somebody's in there.
Don't fuck with me. Fuck your wife.
Okay. Shh. فوری جوابشون نده.
That's my mother. That's my mother.
Your religion, which I've never studied.
دیوانه.
که من مسلمونم. داشتم مورد گفت که تو زن تو اینطوری داره
رو.
فیلم منو دیدی.
آنگلوفون ما تو ویل کبک.
And we just keep filming. We wrap up the shoot and we're in the central square of Quebec City. And at that point, I see her again. And she starts walking towards me very fast. And she starts saying that, you brought your wife out in the cold and you're forcing her to film you in the cold. You forced her, and she, just because you want your profile picture, that's how you brown people, you treat women like cattle. You think they have no rights and everything. And I'm just ignoring her, I'm like, whatever, saying you people rape your sisters, you people fuck your own mothers and everything, you're rapists. I just ignore her, but she keeps walking after me. And at that point, she's completely freed herself from the grasp of her father, who's looking at me like, I'm sorry. And she's just, like yelling at me and everything. And then she starts yelling at everybody in the square. This man tried to rape me, he tried to rape me, he tried to assault me. And that's when I lose it. I stop dead in my tracks, I turn around, I look her dead in the eyes, and I yell for everybody to hear, shut the fuck up, shut your fucking mouth. And I just walk as fast as I can, and I find the first place that I can. I think it was a McDonald's. I lock myself in the McDonald's, and I have a panic attack for the next 10 minutes. The reason I yelled at her was because I was going through a panic attack. The reason why, that's what made me snap. Not all the other comments, but why her false allegation of sexual assault by screaming about it, why that's what made me snap, was because this was the 4th time that a white woman whose views on Middle Eastern men were informed by racist, archaic Orientalist stereotypes falsely accused me of sexual assault. Not the 1st time, not the 2nd time, not the 3rd time's a charm, the 4th time. This was the 4th time that this exact same scenario, a white woman falsely accusing me of sexual assault, had happened to me. The first time I learned that this is a thing, that this is a view, the first time I was confronted with this lingering, archaic, racist Orientalist stereotype was when I was in college, cégep as we call it here in Quebec. In high school, I was in a highly multicultural reality. My high school was very multicultural. I was by far not the only immigrant there. But when I decided to pursue my higher education, I went to academic circles that were very white dominated for many different reasons. There weren't many immigrants just generally in the region to begin with. And a lot of those people had never really met immigrants, and so maybe had certain assumptions and ideas about immigrants due to ignorance, basically, due to lack of familiarity. So the first time I'm confronted with this notion, this perception of me as a Middle Eastern man, it was the first class of a winter semester. I'm walking towards the class, the teacher is at the door, she's greeting the students. She's a white woman in her 50s, 60s. She sees me and she stops me. And she takes me aside. She says, "What's your name?" I'm like, "Faria, nice to meet you." "Faria, I understand that where you come from, there must not be a lot of girls with white skin and beautiful blue eyes. And so you must be very excited right now, so looking at all those beautiful girls with, light hair and blue eyes and everything. But here we have a concept called consent, and we have an idea called gender equality. Here, you can't just walk over to these girls and grab their boobs or their asses. In fact, you can't even ask them about that because, believe it or not, here, they're just classmates, just like you. Isn't that amazing?" And she says that, "I understand you must have a certain way of looking at women, and I understand that in your society, women also think that it's normal to be treated that way, but it's not normal here. Now, I'm here for you. If you're ever confused, if you ever have trouble controlling yourself, you can just come talk to me. I'm here for you." Like a day or two after, I go to a higher up in the program who's also a white woman, and I tell her, I'm like, "Listen, I get that this teacher is older, that she's from a certain time generation, but can you please tell her not to do that again?" And I tell that to the higher up, who's also a white woman, and she responds by saying, "No, I think she did the right thing, because your physical appearance clearly demonstrates that you're from a certain part of the world where there's certain views of women, and I'm sorry if that offended you, but if offending you is the price to pay for ensuring the security of the girls in the class, that's the price we're willing to pay. Now, maybe you already knew about those things, maybe you already understood gender equality, c'est tout à ton honneur," as she says, "but we can't take those risks given where you're from. We just want to make sure that the girls in the class are safe." And that's where I understood, okay, that's how I'm viewed by some of them at least. And that's a thing, that's a view that some people intrinsically have. And that informs, based on that assumption, that just informs how they interact with me. The first time I was threatened with a false allegation of sexual assault, because it didn't actually come to pass, it was a threat. I was at a public gathering, a party, if you will. I was, once again, at that time in my life, I was in completely white circles. I was the only non-white person there. And there's this girl there, she was a white girl, who fancied me, and she fancied me for quite some time. She told me about it. I told her, "Sorry, I'm not interested in you." But in that public gathering, she was there, and she got drunk. She was more confident than usual. So she walks up to me, and she grabs my face and starts kissing me. This was my first kiss, unfortunately. I'm like, "Please stop." I just was not feeling good. And I ask her to please stop repeatedly, and she does not listen. after a while of me asking her to please stop, she finally says, if you keep being boring, I'm going to yell that you're the one who's assaulting me. And she adds, believe me, the older people here, they don't need convincing because I know how they feel about Arabs. I had to let it happen. And it happens, life sucks sometimes, and you know, those things happen, so whatever, life goes on. In December of 2015, I am at a Christmas party, at another public gathering at a party. That's like a school party. It's my program. We're between 2 semesters. The autumn semester is done, so we're at this Christmas party at one of my friends' houses. And there is another white girl there who clearly also fancied me. Now, she was just a classmate. We had barely ever talked, but clearly she must have fancied me for a while because she does the same thing. She, you know, just comes up to me and decides to just, out of nowhere, grab my face. And that one was a lot more like a touchy feel, which was not great. And once again, I ask her to please, stop. And people have asked me, why did you not push them away? Because one, in both cases, I had frozen. When those things happen, you often freeze. It's a normal human response. I had frozen in both cases. And even if I hadn't, I don't think it would have been very smart of me as a guy who looks like a fucking terrorist to push a white girl, because if they're gonna yell about how I attack them, how exactly am I supposed to defend myself? Claim that this, you know, small white girl was sexually assaulting me, a guy who looks like Bin Laden? People are not gonna believe that. Like, I'm not an idiot. So anyway, I plead with her to please stop. She does not listen. She just does her thing, so whatever. A few days later, I vent about it to a friend of mine, who's also a white girl. She was a feminist, and I decided to vent to her because in her feminist ideology, she disliked and rejected gender roles, and so I knew that she wouldn't give me the whole, what are you not a man? Are you a fucking fag? You don't like it when a girl touches you? I knew that she wouldn't give me that kind of brain-dead Neanderthal idea of masculinity. And then I mentioned to her that I'm going to talk about it to the directrice, the female director of the program. I wanted to tell the directrice what happened so that she could make sure that I would not be in the same classes as the girl from the party, because obviously I didn't want to look at her and have her be around me. I didn't want anything to happen, so I clarified, when I'm going to talk to the directrice, I'm just going to ask her to just put me in different classes. I'm not going to ask for anything, I'm not looking for drama. I just don't want to have to see this girl. My friend, she goes apeshit when she hears me say that, and she says, no, you can't talk about it, you have to keep it silent. And she says, give me a few days, I have to talk to some people, and I'll be back soon. So she comes back to me, I'm like, okay. She comes back to me like a day or two later, and she says, I've spoken to some of my friends. She names the friends, all of them white women too. And she says, I've spoken to them and we've decided that you cannot talk about it to the directrice. And her logic was, we live in a patriarchy. You are the man, she's the woman. You are her oppressor, she's oppressed by you. She is completely powerless against you. She has absolutely no power over you. And if you take the risk, if you talk to anybody about what happened, you will take the risk of that rumor spreading and that rumor possibly becoming something bigger that'll negatively affect your career. And if you do that, that will mean that you will be taking the risk of, affecting negatively a woman's life. That would be the patriarchy in action. You will be enacting your patriarchal male oppression and dominance and, oppress yet another woman. And so we cannot allow that to happen. And so just to make sure that you don't make any mistake and talk about it to anybody, because at that point she knew that she was the only person I had talked about it to. She says, just so that we know that you won't talk about it to anybody, if we ever hear anybody bring up that rumor, we'll know you'll have talked about it to somebody. And if we see that it starts escalating to the point where it could negatively affect her academic career, me and all my friends, we're gonna talk to the girl, and together we will testify that you were the one who sexually assaulted her. And rather naively, I ask her, what if I counter-accuse her? And she responds by saying, who's going to believe the brown guy? Very astute observation of hers. I had to concede the argument, and so I stayed silent about that matter and never talked about it again. Life happens. 2017, 2018 rolls in, and by then I'm doing much better. I am studying film studies, and by that time I'm making a lot of independent film projects. For those of you who know that I make my own music videos, you know that videography and filmography are a big passion of mine, and filmmaking was always a big passion of mine. And back then, one of the movies that I made was Andalusian Nights, which is a really cool little, like, shitty, low-budget movie that I made with my friends. That was a love letter to Orientalism. The entire aesthetic of the film was Orientalist by design, because no matter how many times people refuse to listen to me say it, I love that aesthetic and I love it to death. I think it's an absolutely wonderful aesthetic, so long as we make sure that it's not believed to be the real Middle Eastern aesthetic, and so long as it's not the only way of representing the Middle East. But the entire thing was Orientalist, the soundtrack was, the film was set in this like fictional mythological version of Al-Andalus that makes just absolutely no sense. It's a mishmash of different cultures and customs. We're doing these fakeish Arabic accents.
Why did Allah make you so clumsy, Bashir? خلاص, my children. Let's find a way to dispose of this. Do you think it is valuable? It certainly looked so. Maybe it wasn't.
Look, it doesn't matter, okay? The Sultan does not care about these things. However, the princess notices...
What if she does?
Princess Amira!
Baba Ayub?
Sorry about this.
You know how old this thing is?
50 years?
700. It was a gift from a Greek emperor.
I didn't do anything. Me neither.
I'm joking.
What?
I bought it at the market last week. Be more careful next time. At least it wasn't my father's helmet.
Shukran, princess! Oh, shukran!
Halas, go back to the palace. Yalla!
Okay.
The last project of that kind that I did was called Alma Valiente. Given the fact that it was like a no-budget project, I think came up with a pretty good result.
Augusto Jiménez, roi de Castille.
Tyranno.
Le duc d'Aquitaine hier est décédé. Asseline de Carcassonne étant fiancée à lui, c'est désormais toi qui lui sera marié.
Este tirano será demasiado poderoso. Por Dios y por España. Debemos matarlo.
Será Augusto Jiménez, portador de la ley, maestro de Castilla y Carcassona. ¡Viva el rey!
¡Muerta la tiranía!
These were never released. These were just for me and my friends to watch and have fun with. Anyway, in 2018, I'm working on multiple different projects, and one of those projects requires a female actress, and none of my friends who are actresses, they match the casting, so I do a Facebook casting call, and there's this girl that responds, another white girl. You can see where this is gonna go. And she says, I'm interested in the project. She sends an audition tape. I think she's great. And we meet at a cafe to discuss the project, and then we start, working on the project. Now remember, these are low-budget stuff that I'm doing with my friends. It's just me, a camera, or maybe one of my friends, one actor, two other actors. There's no teams, there's no budget. It's just home movies, basically. The first time we start working on the projects, I tell her, this is the changing room. You can go inside, you have your privacy, close the door, change into your costume. And instead, she takes off her clothes in front of me in like a very sexual manner, kind of like a striptease. And she explains to me later that the first time she saw me at the cafe, she thought I was hot, and so she wanted to make it clear to me that she was interested. She was very, very obvious and forward in the way that she would send her signals. And so then we start texting and everything when we're not working on the project, and at some point we're talking about the Hollywood actresses that we think are good looking, and I say, Scarlett Johansson has an amazing ass, and she says, I also have an amazing ass. And she sends me a picture of her showing her forms. And then she starts sending me nudes, and then she starts openly flirting with me. And at that point I say, okay, is this a thing? Are we doing this? Because, and I explained to her, we did not meet on Tinder. If I start suddenly flirting with you out of nowhere, you can see why I'm uncomfortable with the idea. And she says, yeah, but you're not going to start flirting with me out of nowhere. You're going to start flirting with me after I flirted with you first. I did all the first steps, I did all the first moves and everything. But there was a second reason why I really wanted to have that talk and like triple check with her that she was consensual and that she was okay with me flirting back at her and everything, because in the early days of all of this, when she starts texting me and everything, she starts talking about her personal life and everything, and at a few occasions she mentions some things that were a little bit potentially concerning. So she talks about the fact that she has these extreme emotional mood swings where, she'll have a phase where she's super creative and everything, and then she'll go into a phase where she's not at all creative and she, has no creativity and everything. And she used terms like, I have very big mood swings, and she used terms like, I feel like I have different personalities. That's how, extreme sometimes my changes in personality are and everything. And so because of these, before I reciprocated any of the flirtatiousness with her, before I allowed myself to reciprocate the flirting, what I did was I sat down with her in person and I told her, look, you have mentioned things that could potentially imply bigger emotional problems. When you talk about, how you have like those extreme mood swings, when you talk about the fact that you feel like you have different personalities, she mentions how she has her stripper personality, but then sometimes, she'll go into her prudish personality and everything. I told her, you understand why this is concerning, right? Like the vocabulary, the wording that you're using, it can very easily imply some profound mental illnesses. So I asked her, is there anything that I should be aware of, neurological problems that you may have or any emotional problems that you may have? Not because I'm trying to be, sort of discriminatory from a neuroatypical level or anything, but just because I told her if I am going to, engage in this two-way, non-professional relationship, I need to be 100% certain that you are entirely emotionally healthy enough to be able to, engage in that. Her reaction was not very positive. She, in fact, reacts to it in a rather insulted manner, and she tells me, il y a une limite très claire entre, that's how she tells it, il y a une limite très claire. She says, there's a fine line between being a noble white knight feminist guy who wants to triple check if a woman, is able to consent and everything, and then going so far as to questioning her agency and her cognitive capabilities. She said, that's what you're doing right now. Like, now you're just talking down to me as if I'm like somehow not an adult and everything. And she told me, no, when I say that I have big mood swings, when I say that I have different personalities, I don't mean that I'm like some super bipolar, what's the other illness? Borderline personality kind of person. When I say that I have different personalities, she said, it's not like the movie Split. It's not that exaggerated where like I literally switch between personalities. All I meant is I am somebody who's very emotional sometimes, and so I'll have very big mood swings and everything. And now you're being insulting in the way that you're insinuating that maybe I have like thing. And she told me, drop it, because it's actually really fucking insulting. I'm an adult woman. I know what I'm doing. If I say that I want to flirt with you, it's because I know what I want. If I want to take off my clothes in front of you in order to tease you, it's because I know what I want. And you do not get to put that into question. And when you do that, it is honestly patronizing and honestly kind of sexist. So drop it and don't do that. Now, I want you to remember those quotes because they're going to become ironically relevant, unfortunately, later in the story. I saw an adult woman initiating a desire to have a more intimate relationship with me. She mentions some emotional and perhaps mental problems that she has. I took that seriously, those mentions of things that could potentially be emotional problems, and I questioned her on that to be 100% sure. And she looks me dead in the eyes and says, I'm an adult woman, I know what I'm doing, drop this, I just have very big mood swings, and that's what I mean by those terms. And so once I had that assurance, once I had clarified this, then I was like, okay, now I can allow myself to, actually reciprocate the flirtatiousness. So at that point we start not really dating, it's just like a flirtatious relationship, but then very quickly one day we're supposed to rehearse a scene. She says, I don't want to rehearse. She takes off her clothes and she jumps on me and starts kissing me and everything. And so she initiates the physical part of the relationship when she felt like it. And she wanted us to go further. She wanted us to, actually, go all the way. I never went any further than making out with her. In fact, I never went further than making out with all of the women in my life. Because of the sustained trauma and the PTSD, I have a hard time, there's all the PTSD always that's coming back. So it's difficult for me to be physical with women. And so I never really actually, the furthest I went was to kiss and make out, basically. The thing about the relationship was it was a little bit toxic. You don't realize when you're in a toxic relationship necessarily when you're in it, but then when you snap out of it, you realize that actually it was like bad for me. And the reason why it was a bit of a toxic relationship was because this girl was very forward, and whenever she wanted something, she would just do it. So the first time she saw me, she said, "Oh, I thought you were hot, so I just wanted to take off my clothes in front of you because it made me feel empowered and I felt comfortable doing it." And when she told me that, I thought, that's great, but did you not consider my boundaries at all? That maybe somebody who's practically a stranger, the second time we're meeting to work on an Art 6 project, maybe I don't want her suddenly taking off her clothes in front of me. And don't get me wrong, I was attracted to her, but first, being attracted to somebody does not preclude you from having the right of having your boundaries considered. And secondly, because of the trauma that I've been through in the past, her just doing that out of nowhere did hit me like a brick wall with PTSD. And then later on, she said, "Oh, that day I felt like kissing you, and so I kissed you." And that's how she was. She was like, "I want to kiss him, so I'm going to kiss him." And again, imagine if I had done those things. Imagine if I had said, "I want you to see my naked body," and so this hairy, brown, Middle Eastern ape takes off his clothes in front of a white woman who he barely knows. Nobody would question that this is sexually inappropriate behavior and that it constitutes sexual assault. And this girl thrived on that double standard. It's not that she had no concept of consent and of boundaries. She would constantly talk about how guys that she had been previously had not respected her boundaries and everything, but then she would consistently not even realize that I may also have boundaries, and she would consistently not just disrespect my boundaries, but just not even compute that there in the first place, because in her mind, brown men don't have boundaries and consent. White women do. And the reason behind all of that was that she was kind of racist. From the first moment she met me, she would say stuff like, dating guys from your cultures is a mixed bag because you're exotic and good looking, but you have certain views of women. It's hot how people from your cultures take women whenever they want, but the reason you do it is because you don't understand consent, and that's dangerous in the wrong situations.
This allows Western imagination to see Eastern cultures and people as both alluring and a threat to Western civilization. This allows Western imagination to see Eastern cultures and people as both alluring and a threat.
And she would literally say, like, you guys don't have consent in your cultures, you guys don't understand that women are equal to you and everything. And so she would proceed to lecture me on what consent means, to lecture me on what gender equality means, not because of anything I did, not because of anything I said. She just assumed that, well, he's a brown Middle Eastern guy. And from the moment she saw that I was a brown Middle Eastern guy, she decided that I must be a misogynist who does not understand the concepts of consent and everything, and who is potentially sexually dangerous to all of the white women around me. She would basically give me the same stuff that the old teacher would give me. If you see white women, you can't just, that kind of stuff. The one time she made a comment that really pissed me off, there was this one time we were talking about sexuality and like 50 Shades of Grey and everything, and I mentioned that I know an Iranian girl who's into that kind of shit, who likes to be dominated sexually by men. And she says, well, of course she likes that. She's from your culture. Women from your culture, they're brainwashed into subservience. All they know is to be submissive to men. She says, word for word, les femmes dans vos cultures ne comprennent pas qu'elles sont égales aux hommes. That's the one time I got really fucking pissed, and I texted my best friend, Aurora Aguilar, who's one of the singers in some of my songs. I texted her about that, venting to her. I think I wanted to prove to her, I think a part of me was like, I wanted to have the catharsis of her saying, oh, you proved me wrong. That would never come. And what was really hurtful and dehumanizing about all of this was that I would constantly check her boundaries and she never once checked mine. And yet she would lecture me on what boundaries and consent are, because she would not look at our actions. Because if she looked at our actions, she would see that she was the one never checking for my boundaries, and I was the one always checking for her boundaries. But she would ignore our actions, and she would solely look at our ethnicities. She's a white woman, therefore she's pure, and I'm a brown man, therefore I don't understand gender equality and consent and everything. And it really revealed a lot to me about just how those Orientalist views function. That a white woman can never check your boundaries, and then whilst you are checking her boundaries constantly, she will still proceed and lecture you on what consent and boundaries mean on the basis of nothing other than her assuming that you must not know what those things are because you're a Middle Eastern person. And despite the fact that you're clearly showing that you respect boundaries, she somehow blocks that out of her mind and only sees my ethnicity and the assumptions that she has about my ethnicity. In the beginning of the chapter, I talked about how these anecdotes, these individual instances, can be a good way of seeing what Orientalist tropes and motifs look like when they are in action, in an actual individual situation, tangibly speaking, what they look like in an actual real life situation. And basically, I think that's a great example, this double standard between the both of us. She had begun flirting with me first, out of nowhere, and I asked her for her consent, for her permission to flirt back when she has already initiated flirting with me. She mentions some emotional realities that she deals with and psychological realities that she deals with, and before I engage in doing anything, I sit down with her and I triple check with her. On the other hand, when she felt like taking off her clothes in front of me, she just did it. She didn't think of asking me if I was okay with her doing it. She just went ahead and did it because she was like, well, I felt like doing it, so of course I'm going to do it. Then when she felt like kissing me the first time, she just went ahead and kissed me without asking me because in her mind, it didn't even occur to her to ask me. It didn't even occur to her if I was comfortable with it or not. To her, considering how I felt in the equation never crossed her mind. To her, it was just, well, I feel like kissing him, so I'm going to do it. And in that situation, she was lecturing me about what consent means on the basis of nothing other than my ethnicity. That is what an Orientalist trope, like the one that brown men are misogynistic and don't understand consent and backwards in, relationship terms towards women, that's what it looks like in action, tangibly speaking. And anyway, this entire story, this entire relationship taught to me a lot about how Orientalism and how these Orientalist views, they can shape an individual relationship and how it expresses itself in that sort of situation. If only that was the end of the story, because that's only part one of the story. So now we're at part two of the story with this girl. Eventually the relationship fizzles out. We both were not ready for a very long-term relationship, and I think that the fact that I was not ready to commit to being fully physical with her, to go beyond just kissing and making out, I think that kind of turned her off. Understandably, I never was able to ever have a relationship for a very long time because understandably women want to have the whole thing and I'm not able to give it to them because of my trauma and my PTSD. Then 2019 comes in, COVID comes in, the lockdowns happen, and we don't talk for about like 2 years basically. There was no big dramatic breakup, we just kind of stopped talking to one another. 2 years later, in 2021, after 2 years of almost not talking to her, I text her about something regarding one of the projects, and then she responds and she adds, by the way, in the future, make sure not to abuse a girl when she's feeling vulnerable. And I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, oh no, I just wanted you to know. And so I thought maybe she was just being racist again and like assuming that I'm a sexual threat just because I'm a brown guy. But there was something off about the way that she says it, and I kind of like, it sticks with me for a few months, and then in July of 2022, I write to her and I'm like, what did you mean by that? Like, what was that about exactly? And she says, well, you sexually harassed me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, I just joined your artistic project. I just wanted a professional rapport. I was not interested in you. I showed you no signs of interest, and out of nowhere, you start flirting with me and you ask if you can touch me. At this point, I'm like, am I actually crazy? Did I hallucinate? So I go back to the old texts to check them, and I can see that she's sending me nudes. She's sending me photos of her in lingerie. She's talking about how she loves flirting with me and everything. And so I'm like, what is she doing? And at that point, I just deflate psychologically and I enter like a big depressive phase because I'm like, okay, here we go again with this same old pattern of the false allegation of sexual assault coming back into my life. And at that point I was like, oh great, now she's just gonna decide to accuse me of sexual assault for no reason. And I don't understand what's going on. I keep texting her, and after a while she reveals to me, so that's in July of 2022, she says, a few days or a few weeks ago, I have been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. I have just realized that I have 23 personalities living in my body, and one of the side effects of that is amnesia. And she says, I don't remember a lot about you, to be honest. I don't remember much of what we did. But what I do remember is I was not interested in you at all, and you out of nowhere began showing sexual advances towards me, and that is the definition of sexual assault, and you were sexually inappropriate, and that's sexual harassment. Turns out that, in fact, my worries in 2018, when I condescended to her and patronized her, as she had put it back then, in fact, my worries were justified. There were more deeper underlying psychological problems at the root of the things that she was describing. Back in 2018, she told me with extreme confidence and resoluteness, no, the things that I described to you, that's all they are. I just feel like I have different personalities. I just have big mood swings, and that's all they are. 4 years later, she herself would learn that, in fact, those were symptoms of an actual profound mental illness. Back then, she didn't know that she had this mental illness. Her parents didn't know, her family didn't know. She herself back then, she didn't know that it was like a multiple personality thing, but now I'm like, back then she herself was noticing the patterns of that. And years later, she and everybody, including me, would suddenly discover that actually she has a mental illness with dissociative identity disorder. She had 23 personalities, after all, living inside her body. And the woman that I had known, the woman that had flirted with me, the woman who was interested in me, the woman who had told me that she wanted me to reciprocate, the woman who had told me she wanted me to kiss her, the woman who had asked me to have sex with her and I refused because, my personal reasons, that woman was one of her 23 personalities. And that is the only person I knew. The person that I had known from 2018 to 2019 was one of the facets of her system. That is the person that I interacted with during that 9 months to 1 year. The person who was texting me in 2022, 4 years later, was another one of her personalities. That's why she could not remember anything that her other personality had done. All she could remember was the things that I had done. So from her point of view, all that her memory told her was, I joined this artistic project, and then Faria Faraji asked me if he could touch me. And everything in between was completely lost to her. At that point, I texted all of my friends who are female actresses. I asked every one of them, have I ever been inappropriate towards you? And all of them answered, no, we love working with you. You're very safe to work with. Why are you even bringing this up? And I talked to them about what happened with the girl. And that's when the most amazing thing happens. All of these women, all of these actresses that I worked with, most of them, they have been sexually assaulted by men in the past, but they were all on my side. They all said, you're not a rapist, you are a good person, and they said, we will testify publicly on your behalf if she ever goes ahead with like public allegations or anything like that. And so my entire support system was made up of all of the women that I had worked with on other projects before. And what was very clear to us, to me and all of those female friends, was that the girl in question, her amnesia blocked out selectively parts of her memory. She completely forgot about how she had initiated the relationship, about how she was interested in the first place, about how she did all the first moves, and that she drove the relationship, and that I, in my paranoia, only reacted after she initiated every step and every stepping stone of the relationship. And so all she remembered was her coming into a project, and then the only other thing she remembers is me suddenly asking her if I can touch her. She completely forgot about the part that she was interested in me, she began being physical with me, and then me, in order to make sure that I have her consent, would constantly ask her every time we met if I could touch her. I was not doing well at that point because I was like, well, I'm not proud to admit, 3 years ago at this time, around this time, it was July of 2022, I was considering taking my own life because I thought that my life is over. She's just going to destroy my reputation and everything I have, and it's going to be the third time that this is potentially happening. What if it happens again? But my friends were there for me. Aurora Aguilar, who's my best friend that I talked about earlier, she did not give up on me, and she said, no, we have to stop this girl, and what she's doing is wrong, and all the other girls were also with her. So Aurora writes a very long message to the girl, a very long message to the girl. And basically what she explains to the girl is, you are underestimating the degree to which your amnesia is blocking out parts of your memory. Because we know that you have amnesia, we are letting you know, go back to the early texts. go back to the early texts and you will see for yourself that the image you have of what happened with Faria is completely inaccurate. Faria did not out of nowhere start flirting with you or asking if he could touch you. He specifically did those in a context where you had initiated an intimate relationship with him in the first place. Aurora adds to this, because you have amnesia, we are doing you a favor by letting you know this, because if you post allegations about him, those will be defamatory allegations. But now you have no excuse to post those allegations because we have let you know about the texts. Just scroll up for 2 minutes like that on Facebook Messenger, go back to 2018, and you will see for yourself that your mental illness is worse than you thought, and you actually are misremembering what happened in the past. Aurora adds, you don't want to be yet another white woman in the history of North America who has issued a false allegation of sexual assault against a man of color. This is unfortunately a pattern in North American history. One only needs to Google the term face of Emmett Till before and after to see why that is unfortunately a trope that has reared its ugly head in the social interactions of North America over and over again. And finally, she adds, Faria is currently suicidal. He's talking about killing himself. So if you post those allegations, you will have posted those allegations knowing they're wrong because you have no excuse. Now you know about the old texts, so you can go back and check them. So if you decide to post the allegations, not only you will have posted defamation, but you will also have posted defamation that constituted reckless, unjustified endangerment of an innocent person's life. So basically my best friend told her, yeah, for your own sake, don't make that mistake. And at that point, all of my friends were like, well, this is settled. She's not an idiot. She's not going to put herself in so much legal hot water. She's not going to post the allegations knowing all of this, because if she posts the allegations, she knows that you're suicidal. She knows that there's old text that she forgot about that she's going to check now. She's not stupid. Of course she's not going to post the allegations and put herself in a situation where she can easily be sued for defamation and reckless endangerment of somebody's life on the basis of lies. Well, my friends were wrong. The girl, when she receives the message, immediately what does she do? She posts allegations about me on her Instagram profile to her tens of thousands of followers. And for a few hours on her Instagram, she claims that I joined this artistic project and then out of nowhere, this narcissistic, sexually violent pervert began flirting with me and asking me if he could touch me. She also made up details, which is interesting. So she claimed that I forced her to drink alcohol so that I could take advantage of her. Now that is probably like her mental illness at play again, because first off, she made that claim about a shoot specifically. It's fucking eyeliner still. She made that claim about a shoot specifically where there was another party. One of those women that was on my side. She was there back in 2018 on that shoot. And she claims that during that shoot, among others, I forced her to drink alcohol. So what happens is, at that time in 2018, I'm working on multiple different projects at the same time. One of those projects is called Dobry Wieczór. It was a sequel to Dziwny Dzień, which we did in 2016. And in this movie, I played the role of Fabian, who is a Romani Polish guy.
Anatoly!
Who is obsessed with his Żołądkowa Gorzka bottle. He always has this bottle of Żołądkowa Gorzka. The people who saw the Oshadai video, now you know that this was actually an inside joke for my friends. It was a reference, the style of the video in the Żołądkowa Gorzka bottle was a reference to those Polish-themed movies that we made a long time ago. So that bottle was one of the props that I had in my bag of props. I had this bag full of props and equipment that I would carry around for the different projects, and because I was juggling different projects at the same time, this was one of the props in that bag. I'm doing that shoot with her, with the third party who's there, the other woman who's there. I open the bag, and she sees the vodka bottle in there, and she says, why is there a vodka bottle? I say, because it's the prop for one of my movies, and she says, can I drink a little bit of it because I want to taste it? It looks good. And I said, sure, just don't drink all of it because I need to have liquid in it when I'm filming the actual project. And so she asked me if she can drink. I give it to her, she drinks, and then she even takes a video of her drinking the vodka bottle and posting it on Facebook and doing a comedic skit with it. But then 4 years later, she's claiming that I forced her to drink alcohol. 4 years later, she claims that she was not attracted to me, but I have texts of her stating she's attracted to me. 4 years later, she claims that I flirted with her out of nowhere, and then 4 years before, I have the texts of her, flirting with me and everything, and saying that she wants to flirt. And she ends the accusation by saying, who knows how many female victims he's created, but you will not create any more female victims, and I have ended your career, I have saved women, basically. The comedy of it was kind of funny because every other female actress that I worked with was on my side in this. Those accusations did not last long. They did not go public at any broad level. Nobody shared them or anything. They were on her Instagram stories for a few hours. Probably a few thousand of her followers saw them, but she took down the stories herself after a few hours. And her Instagram goes silent for a few days. She posted the stories on the night of July 31st to August 1. During that night, I almost took my own life. One of my friends had to call the police the next morning to make sure that I would not hurt myself. Because I was already psychologically vulnerable, not just because of this entire situation, but it was the accumulation of all of the things that had happened to me with this same pattern repeating itself, of being accused of sexual assault. I almost took my own life on that night between July 31st and August 1, 2022. But my friends were there for me. They called the police, my best friend Aurora, all my other friends, they were there for me. They said, we love you, we're here for you, you're a good person, and we are on your side, and we know that this is wrong. A few days later, the girl who accused me posts news stories on her Instagram, and she writes, holy shit, I am in complete shock. I have just gone back to some old texts, and I have found myself saying things that I do not remember saying, stating things that I do not remember stating. Since then, the girl never brought me up again. She never apologized. She never corrected her claims. She just basically went silent and, never brought me up again, ever again. And I never had any trouble from her ever again. In the years since this happened, my friends kept asking one question over and over again. Why on earth did she not go back to the old texts before posting the allegations? She knew she had amnesia. She had been made aware that there are texts that you can check that prove what you are stating right now wrong. And she still decided to post the allegations anyway, knowing that these allegations have at least the possibility of being false, knowing that they can actually endanger a suicidal, innocent person's life. Legal experts and people that I consulted told me she is in deep legal trouble because not only did she defame you, she defamed you by recklessly endangering your life because she knew you were suicidal, that there are old texts she can check before posting the allegations. So everybody around me was dumbfounded. Why would she not just do that for 2 minutes and check the allegations first? Why did she take that risk? Not out of a human, empathetic perspective of, what if I destroy an innocent man's life? From her own perspective of self-preservation, of not putting herself in legal trouble. Everybody around me in the years since has been dumbfounded and cannot understand why she did that. But it was never a mystery to me, and the answer to me was always very clear. From the moment she had met me, she had decided that I am a misogynist and a sexually violent person who does not understand consent and who cannot treat women with respect on the basis of nothing but my ethnic identity. This Orientalist trope of brown men being sexually violent and dangerous and rapists and misogynistic and, treating women like cattle was something she held on to so profoundly the entire time we knew each other, from the moment she had met me, that it made her that confident. In order for her to go back to check the texts first, it would mean that she would have to put into question the notion of me being sexually violent because I'm a brown guy. She would never put that into question. For her, the confidence was absolute. All she could remember was she joined the brown guy's project, and then this brown guy asked her if he could touch her. He's a brown guy. Of course, what else is there? She knew that she had amnesia, and still, she would not consider the possibility that maybe it was her attracted to me, because that is how confident her assumptions on brown men made her. That's the terrifying thing about racist psychology. The reason why people become racist so easily, the reason why some people become ideologically racist is because racism does not deal in nuances. It offers a very simple guide to viewing the world. It puts the world into, pardon the pun, black and white boxes and yellow and brown boxes. With racism, you can just essentialize people and go, he comes from that culture, that's how he is, I know what to expect, and I don't need to, think about it twice. It's a convenient way of looking at the world. It simplifies the world and essentializes the world. And that is the terrifying thing about racist psychology. It's how confident it can make people. From the moment she had met me, she had been so confident in her ideas of what brown men are, that when she was confronted with the knowledge that she has amnesia and with the knowledge that there are texts out there that she could check first, she still thought to herself, nah, I am certain what this guy is like. That is the dark side of Orientalism. That even when a woman knows she has amnesia, and even when she's told, go back to check the text first, because if you don't, you will be in deep legal trouble, she will confidently take the risk of putting herself in deep legal trouble because she's that confident that she is right. A confidence entirely based on her certain assumptions about other ethnicities. There was one part in all that vitriol directed at me in those false accusations in 2022 on the girl's Instagram profile. One part more than any other really hurt me. Aurora, who's a woman of color herself, had written in her message to the girl before the accusations, she had written to her, you must understand the racist dynamic that's going on right now. You as a white woman are, she didn't openly say, we know that you're racist and that's why in your amnesia, all you remember is, I joined Faria's project, he started flirting with me, must be because he's sexually inappropriate because he's a brown guy. We knew that that's why she was so quick to jump to that conclusion. Of course, she didn't confront the girl directly with that, but she did tell her, you have to do some sort of understanding of like the racist dynamic at play here. And she told the girl, on 2 different occasions in the past, Faria has been dealing with the reality of the false allegation of sexual assault by white women who are wielding the dynamics of racism against him. And in her response, the girl, in her Instagram accusation, she says, if this guy has been dealing with false allegations of sexual assault in the past, maybe he should stop looking for them. That's the one that really hurt me. Because it was like, I never went looking for them. The first time it ever happened, I just existed at a party physically. I was just there. I didn't do anything. And some girl who loses control because she wants me, she just goes over to me, disrespects my consent, does her thing, and then wields that against me to keep me silent. The second time, another white girl who was also attracted to me does the same thing, and then another white woman on her behalf uses the dynamics of what she knew was racism to silence me. When I was in Sadorini walking towards the bus station, I wasn't doing anything. I was just there. I was just walking to a bus station because I wanted to go get a ferry. But just because I happened to exist in the same vicinity as 4 white girls with the face that I have, with the appearance that I have, that was enough for those women to feel so unsafe that they needed to get closer to the older white man over there. 2-3 months after that, there's this girl posting the allegations on Instagram. When we had met in 2018, she saw me and said, I want to send him nudes, I want to flirt with him, I'm going to kiss him now because I feel like kissing him. I didn't even initiate the relationship with her, she initiated everything, because obviously with my trauma and everything, I never initiated any relationships with any girls because my first kiss was not consensual, so I never had the capacity, I'm too defensive, if you will. And so it's always been women who had to initiate with me, and then I see if I'm able to reciprocate if the PTSD is not too strong. And then in Quebec City in 2022, I'm just filming a clip with my mom, and some crazy junkie comes in, starts hurling accusations that as a brown guy I'm a misogynist rapist, and then she starts screaming at everybody in the square that I tried to sexually assault her. And to have this girl say, maybe he should stop looking for for those situations. Maybe he should stop putting himself in situations of false sexual allegation. I never went looking for anything. It's always been these tropes that went looking for me, that came looking for me. Tropes that exist in society out there, just hover in the zeitgeist. And that's ultimately what the dark side of Orientalism is. It's these tropes that exist, that make their ways into the minds of some people, and then they become harmful the moment these people take these tropes and act out on them, believing them to be an accurate representation of reality. A lot of people told me to go after her, to go in courts, to get her ass and everything, and I was like, look, the poor girl's mentally ill. She has 23 personalities, and the reason she has dissociative identity disorder is, because of trauma that she sustained as a child. I'm not here to ruin anybody's lives, and ultimately, who the individuals were in this big biography of mine is irrelevant, because it's not about the individuals, it's about what they believed in. See, these ideas, those are not random individual occurrences. That teacher that I had, the girl who assaulted me and then leveraged how society views brown men to silence me, that other girl who silenced me about talking about the other girl by again leveraging how society views men of Middle Eastern descent. The girls who needed to get closer to an older white man in Sadorini because me existing in the same space of them with my features was enough to make them feel unsafe. Those are not coincidentally the same thing propping up over and over again out of, oh, these are just random people who came up with random ideas out of nowhere from their own imaginations. Those are concepts that are taught. Those are tropes and concepts and ideas that have been passed down. Through the persistence of those ideas, it ended up making their way into their minds. The woman who was high and accusing me of sexual assault at everyone in the Old Quebec Center. I don't know what her name is, and I don't care. I don't care about canceling her individually. That won't change anything. I just wish for these systematic beliefs to end, to dismantle the systematic presence of these motifs and tropes that operate in an algorithmic manner, in a systematic manner. That is what I am interested in breaking down. One of my favorite bits of stand-up is by Dave Chappelle, in which he tells the story of Emmett Till, the young boy that I talked about. Emmett Till was a young African-American 14-year-old boy who was falsely accused of sexually harassing a white woman. She made up the fact that he sexually harassed her, and so what that resulted in was his brutal murder. First he was tortured, beaten, and then murdered. The white woman knew what was going to happen. This was Mississippi in the 50s. She knew what that lie entailed and what it was going to cause. But Dave Chappelle's twist on the story is very interesting. He presents it in a sort of weirdly positive light, because what he says is that the story of Emmett Till was one of the great catalysts for the civil rights movement of America. And so in a weird way, that woman's heinous, monstrous lie actually made the world a better place in the end. And I was thinking about that story by Dave Chappelle a lot when I was reeling from, the psychological fallout of this entire affair that had happened, not only with this last girl, but all of the things that had happened before that. Because it is a big psychological weight, I was already dealing with the PTSD and the trauma of being a victim of sexual assault, but then also dealing with the trauma of a false allegation of sexual assault. It was a little too much for my brain to take. And the fact of the matter is that, of course, I am not Emmett Till. I was not murdered or anything. My situation is nowhere near comparable to Emmett Till's, but in my case also, it was a monstrous lie that did cost me something. It tore a part of my personhood that I'm never going to be able to have again. I will never be able to be in a relationship ever again. I know that. I knew that then when it happened in 2022, and I still know it to be true. It was already hard enough for me to form relationships with my difficulty in being physically intimate because of the PTSD and everything, and the trauma. And now you add to that the PTSD that has resulted from that false allegation of sexual assault from that girl. And you know, it's I'll never be able to ever heal out of this, because I still remember the absolute certainty, the resoluteness with which she looked me in the eyes and said, I am not mentally ill. I am telling you, my consent is there. I am consenting. You can trust me. I'm an adult woman. It's like, you know, I'll never be able to trust ever again. And so I will literally never be a normal person after that in terms of relationships. I'll never be able to have a loved one, a significant other. And so I thought to myself for a while, I thought, is that it? Is that all that this is? Is this thing that happened in July 22, when I die, is the only thing that that's going to be? All it's going to be is the event that traumatized me to the point where I can't have relationships? Is that all it's ever going to be? Of course it is that, unfortunately. I can't change that. I can't change the impact that it had on my mental health and on my psychology, but I thought maybe I can make it into something more, the same way that Dave Chappelle talked about how Emmett Till's mother used the murder of her son as a catalyst for the civil rights movement in America. I'm not comparing myself to her, of course. I'm not saying that it's anywhere near to the same degree, but what I'm trying to tell to the people watching this video is that it was really after that event in July 2022, that I really came out of it saying to myself, fuck this, I need to really put everything I have into this channel. And that's when really this channel sort of went into full power mode. And the reason is because the foundational ideology at the root of this channel is that all cultures deserve to be cherished for their beauty, promoted for their beauty, and all cultures deserve to be accurately understood. If one thing is the driving ideology and the philosophy behind everything that I do, is that we must stop approaching other cultures with our preconceived notions inherited from popular zeitgeist, and we must give those cultures a chance and see them for what they actually are. And the reason why that is such a foundational ideology to me, the reason why it is so important to me, is because that ideology lacking was the entire basis of the whole shit show that happened with that girl. From the very beginning, she had treated me with her assumptions of what Middle Eastern people are, completely inaccurate, completely fantastical, nonsensical ideas of my culture, completely inaccurate ideas of who the country women in my culture are. And the utter disgust that I felt at how she treated me as a person of color, as a man of Middle Eastern descent, after her false allegation, that just gave me the motivation, fuck this, I want to do everything I can to just fight for this ideal, for this principle that all peoples on earth deserve to be understood for what they are, understood as they are, and have their beauty recognized and their beauty promoted and celebrated. It's a little bit cathartic, and so, you know, maybe I like to think that what happened in July 2022 was the catalyst for me really going into the production of this channel and me really trying to make this channel into something as special as I can make it. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of people have been affected by it. A lot of people have told me that thanks to you, I discovered traditions that I never thought I would be interested in. Some people told me that thanks to you, we've discovered how beautiful Middle Eastern music is, and we never thought it was that beautiful. I've had Greeks tell me that they have started appreciating their own musical culture thanks to my videos. Around a dozen people tell me so far that they are going into ethnomusicology as a career because of my channel, that years ago they discovered my channel and that this sparked their interest into ethnomusicology, and now they're going to become ethnomusicologists, that my videos and my content helped guide them towards the career, sparked the interest in the career that they're now pursuing. I've had Turkish people tell me that, you know, I hated Serbs and Balkaners and Greeks, but because you had sung Turkish music so wonderfully, it made me want to listen to your Greek songs. And now, thanks to you, I've fallen in love with Greek music, and now I don't hate Greeks anymore. Now I actually love Greece and I want to visit there and I want to love it. I've had so many of these testimonies on my channel. I've had so many of these testimonies either in the comments or people writing me these kinds of emails and everything. There was one guy who once wrote to me privately who said that, Faria, I am an American guy I come from a racist family, I come from a rural place. I'm not proud to admit that I used to view all brown Middle Eastern people as our enemies, as terrorists and everything. I thought they were a bunch of desert savages, those repetitive tropes and everything. But then he said, I first discovered you through an Iranian song, and I'm a musician. And the moment I heard your Iranian music, I thought to myself, that is clearly a very sophisticated and developed musical idiom. And clearly a bunch of desert savages would not have such a complicated and sophisticated and advanced musical idiom. And so that opened a rabbit hole for him. And basically, to summarize what he said was, if it wasn't for you, I'd pretty much still have a racist view of Middle Easterners. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about ethnomusicology. When you show to a certain people that the music of that culture is beautiful, that the history of that culture is worthwhile, that their legends are amazing, that their folk is amazing. Look at this folk song. Listen to the beauty of this folk song. Look at the complexity of the history found in this folk song. Listen to the beauty of the phonology of that language. When people recognize beauty where beauty is there, it's harder for them to be racist. Anyway, 3 years ago, I was on the verge of leaving this world, but I stayed because so many women around me, my mother, my best friend Aurora, and all of the actresses that I worked with, they all supported me, they all were there for me, they all told me that, they were on my side, and that gave me the motivation to continue. And listening at Dave Chappelle's words gave me the motivation to turn what happened into 2022 into a motivation to tell myself, yeah, fuck that shit, fuck this essentializing view of other cultures, of treating other people like shit because of your assumptions on other cultures. And I basically went full on into this crusade of celebrating and promoting the beauty that all cultures deserve to be promoted and celebrated, because all peoples are equal and all peoples are equally beautiful. For all those of you who, no matter for how long you've been doing it, if you've been on this journey with me, if you agree with me in this ideal that all humans are equal and all humans deserve to be treated with respect and have their cultures not essentialized and not be treated in a demeaning, condescending manner because you think that they're backwards and everything. If you think that all cultures have beauty and deserve to have their beauty celebrated, if you are with me on this journey of mine with this humble little channel, I want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. Anyway, I've spoken for too long and I've spoken a little bit too much, so I'm going to stop talking your ears off. Thank you very much for having listened, everybody.